Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to all the dignitaries and participants joining us from all across the country. I am Dr. Shilpi Sharma, working as Project Scientist C in ICMR Bioethics Unit, and I'll be moderating the session for today's program. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you all for ICMR training on roles and responsibilities of Ethics Committee members, and I'm very grateful to all of you for taking time off your busy schedule to attend this program. Ethics Committee is a multidisciplinary group of members who review and approve biomedical and health research proposals submitted by researchers across the globe with the responsibility to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of the research participants. With this background, I would now like to invite Dr. Prashant Mathur, Director, National Center for Disease Informatics and Research, Bengaluru, to give opening remarks and brief us about the training objectives. We welcome you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpi. Good morning. I am Dr. Prashant Mathur, and on behalf of the ICMR Bioethics Unit at the National Center for Disease Informatics and Research, Bengaluru, my staff, the faculty today for this program, I welcome all the participants and the faculty on this ICMR training on the role of Ethics Committee members in India. We are also joined by people outside India, and I also welcome them for sparing their time and being with us today. You are aware that ICMR brought out the guidelines for human research in 2017, which have become very popularly used by all researchers and ethics committee members. So ethics committee, as Dr. Shilpi said, it is the responsibility to protect the dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of research participants, to ensure that local community values and customs are taken into consideration, undertake timely and competent review, which is free from any bias or influence, and guide researchers on the welfare and safety of research participants and scientific soundness. The 2017 guidelines of ICMR are quite exhaustive, and they cover a wide spectrum of different types of research which are carried out and are applicable. Several developments happened after 2017. In 2019, the ICMR guidelines were mandated by the 2019 Clinical Drugs and Trial Rules to be followed by all researchers in this country. Then the Department of Health Research set up the ethics registry. So today, all ethics committees are required to register in the DHR registry portal, NETIC, and also those who are involved in the regulatory trials and regulatory studies to register with CDSCO. We are working with CDSCO to harmonize both these requirements so that it becomes a seamless effort for the investigators and other stakeholders. Last year, the ICMR Bioethics Unit was also recognized by the WHO as a collaborating center for the Southeast Asia, and this was the first such kind of a WHO collaborating center for bioethics. There have been several publications which have been brought out by the Bioethics Unit, which are relevant for India and are very popular outside India also. So looking at the Ethics Committee, as I said, its role is to ensure the highest standards of ethical review and processes and the scientific merit in research involving human participants. They have an obligation to society which provides the resources for research and will ultimately be affected by the results. So it's a human protection scheme or an endeavor which protects us in all ways possible. And so researchers should equally acknowledge the contribution of the ethics committees to ensure that research meets these highest ethical and scientific standards. Ethics committee reviews proposed research and its related activities to see that they conform to the prevailing guidelines and regulations in the country, and that there is nothing much going wrong in that direction. Not only new proposals, but ongoing studies are to be monitored once they have begun, and they have an authority to approve, reject, or stop studies or suggest modifications to the research protocols. And this is done to minimize the outcomes or bad outcomes of research. It also needs to minimize the potential impacts of conflicts of interest in decision-making process. One of the provisions for the ethics committees to function properly is its composition. And the ICMR guidelines have very nicely elucidated to the principles of how an ethics committee composition should be, what should be the criteria, what procedures should be followed. So once all ethics committees lay down their all standard operating procedures and follow them, the practice of ethics will become much easier. So one of the requirements of the ethics committee composition is that it should be multidisciplinary, so that it is not exclusively have members only from the scientific community or the scientific experts. Since some types of risk and benefits may be more easily identified by non-scientific members, particularly those coming from social science background, anthropology, legal, or some cultural considerations and local context, lay people who represent community. It requires assessment of a favorable benefit to risk ratio, and this requires a high level of analysis and evaluation. The diversity in backgrounds and qualifications can help ensure that these judgments are not inappropriately dominated by a single specialty or a single perspective. And so social diversity and gender balance needs to be reflected in the composition of the ethics committee, including the age balance, so that you have people who are younger in age, people who are middle age, people who are seniors, so that you bring in all kinds of perspectives and experiences and into the discussions. The committees, many times, ethics committee needs to be looking into broad community issues. It should be very well conversant with what is going on locally or at the national level, and be sensitive to the research which they are reviewing. And they should encourage community participation in the research, in the decision making, and in the conduct of many field studies which involves communities. So members of ethics committees should attend ethics committee meetings regularly and fully. So it's not that you come for some time and then you leave after some time, or you come in between, or you just send your written comments. Once in a while is fine, but not as a regular practice. It should review and discuss, consider proposals for evaluation, and the reviewers for each proposal who are marked should review the study in totality. Other members of the ethics committees should offer their comments and suggestions to improve the study. They should take up issues of discussing serious adverse events and recommend appropriate action. Monitoring of ongoing studies and reports should be as serious as reviewing new proposals. In fact, even final reports and outcomes which have been suggested must be evaluated by the ethics committee to give it a whole perspective, and researchers will benefit from this wisdom that they get from the ethics committee. Maintaining confidentiality is of utmost importance because documents are shared, comments are shared, so they should not be circulated beyond what is necessary. Members of ethics committees should declare conflicts of interest, and if there are major conflicts of interest, they should be handled, and such members could abstain from such discussions of those proposals. One of the important aspects of ethics is that it is a rapidly evolving and it's a dynamic area. And so very frequent trainings should be organized for ethics committee members. And this is a part and responsibility of head of institutions and member secretaries of ethics committees to keep their members of ethics committees updated with the latest developments in guidelines, laws, and regulations. Also, periodically update and keep abreast with the community and social developments which are happening in the local context or in a larger context. And if deemed necessary, the committee should suggest any changes which are required in its own standard operating procedures so that the functioning of ethics committee becomes more streamlined and better. At times, ethics committee members should not shy away from undertaking site visits wherever feasible so that they have a hands-on experience and can give inputs in addressing any ethical issues or challenges which are emerging. Now, that is what a theoretical framework I have presented to you, and it is derived from the ICMR ethical guidelines. However, what we need to do is to understand how to make it functional. And as you know, that ethics committees are set up by institutions and they have an organizational perspective. And these research studies could be single institution, they could be multi-centric studies, and they could even involve international collaboration and partnerships. So ethics committee members should be aware of these requirements and existing regulations and guidelines and review processes which should be completed. The ultimate aim of the research which is proposed is to benefit mankind and also the society. And research is a teamwork of researchers, funders, reviewers, ethics committees, stakeholders, and communities. And the researcher is at the center of all these, connecting all these stakeholders. And hence it is very important for the researchers also to understand how an ethics committee would like to function. Ethics committees are not meant to stop research. They are meant to facilitate research, to handhold the researchers, to sort out their problems and suggest ways of how to overcome the ethical issues which they face. While ethics committees are also required to look at the science of the proposals, but it should be looked in a manner which puts up ethical challenges. And so researchers must be receptive to this concept of listening to scientific inputs also. But the discussion should not be purely dominated by science without ethics also. Today's workshop has been constructed around a lot of feedbacks and discussions which the ICMR Bioethics Unit gets through a network of its advisors, experts, and member secretaries asking and writing to us. While there is a framework, the guideline says that one should do this, but how do we optimize the use of knowledge and skills of each member of the ethics committee? Some members are very vocal, some are not vocal and are unable to voice their opinion or comments. And this creates a disbalance in the discussions and the outcomes. So how do we make the ethics committee meetings more interactive and more useful? And that can happen when all members are able to put forth their views, their comments, and their perspective from the different fields and the different skill sets that they come from. And all this will help in creating and developing a more robust system for reviewing research proposals from an ethics angle. And we also need practical tips on how to balance the interests of researchers, funders, various members of the ethics committee, and the community at large. With this in mind, we have proposed today's agenda, wherein after my remarks, you will be listening to an overview of the ICMR National Ethical Guidelines from Dr. Roli Mathur. And after that, we will have a lot of discussions and questions from you. So there are very few lectures in this workshop. We would like to hear from you. We would like to listen from you. So please use the chat box in this webinar to put in your questions and comments. And we have a very robust panel of experts, which are led by Dr. Vasanta Muthuswamy, who is the pioneer of bioethics in this country, a former senior official of ICMR, still continues to give us very valuable guidance. And thank you, ma'am, for being with us. And co-chair Dr. Narendra K. Arora, also a clinician and a leading public health researcher with very vast experience and knowledge of ethics committee and ethics committee functioning. So we have picked up panelists from different roles which ethics committees function. So we have Dr. Urmila Thatte, who as chairman of ethics committee would give her perspective, Dr. Naresh Gupta as a clinician, Dr. Dennis Xavier as a basic scientist or a pharmacologist, Dr. B.T. Kaul, who is a legal expert, will give his perspective, Dr. Shalini Bharat, a social scientist, Dr. Nandini Kumar, an ethicist, Dr. Harmala Gupta, a layperson's or a patient representative expert opinion, Dr. Siddharth Laskar as a member secretary. I would come in as a representative of a head of institution or an appellate, Dr. Banu Rekha from ICMR as a researcher, and Dr. Roli Mathur. So we would put in a lot of questions to these panelists for them to answer from their practical experience that they have, and take in the questions that you will be putting up. We have had an enormous response to this workshop. We have more than 850 registrations, and as I can see now, we have a large number of almost 600 participants who have already logged in and joined us. This is very encouraging, and thank you all very much for being, and please be there with us continuously. We will be joined later in the day by Dr. Cristina Torres, who is an international expert on ethics committees and will again tell us some more tips and practical experiences which she has from her inter-country experiences on multidisciplinary functioning of ethics committees and their roles. So again, thank you all very much for being here. Be with us and make it a very interactive workshop so that we all benefit and we are able to fulfill the purpose for which we have gathered today. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Shilpi.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for providing an overview of the program. Thank you. Just an announcement, if the participants have any questions for our speakers, they may post the question in the question and answer section, and they will be collated and put forward to the speakers in the panel discussion or in the question and answer session. Going forward, the next session for today is on overview of ICMR National Ethical Guidelines. To present that, we have with us Dr. Roli Mathur, the head of the ICMR Bioethics Unit at ICMR NCDIR Bengaluru. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shilpi. So I'm very happy that we have a huge audience gathered here. Thank you all for joining in. And I'll be speaking about what is there in the National Ethical Guidelines about the roles and responsibilities of the ethics committees, and otherwise also what are the contents of the ICMR National Ethical Guidelines. And I would urge you before I begin that you visit our website to download the host of different documents that are there that may be useful for you. Some of these are guidelines, some of them are ethics committee tools such as common forms and others. So with this pandemic last year, we had to come out very quickly with a new guidelines document for ethics committees, specifically reviewing research during COVID-19. So this is another document. It's an add-on to the main guidelines, so it may be useful for you all. So as we all understand, during humanitarian emergencies, we would not like to, as scientists, we would not like to have any compromise at all on the scientific validity, as well as we have to fulfill the ethical requirements. So this guideline helps us to understand the priorities, how to address the increased vulnerabilities, the changes in the governance framework, as well as new challenges in tackling with the COVID pandemic, and being able to conduct robust ethics review by adopting new methodologies, new tools and methods, infrastructure, resources with limited communications. So all this has been addressed in the guidelines. And we feel also happy to say probably this is one of the first kind of guideline that came out as early as April 2020. And it talks about a review of research related to COVID, new research related to COVID, as well as ongoing research which is non-COVID related. So it has addressed all three. All ICMR guidelines and other international documents base their discussions over the principles of ethics: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And I understand all of you, as most of you are members of the ethics committee, very well understand how we have to keep these principles in place. So the scope of the guidelines of 2017 ICMR guidelines was enhanced, because earlier it was only biomedical health research, but now it talks also about socio-behavioral research, which is related to health. So that also now comes into the purview of the ethical guidelines. And it is not only when research is involving human participants. We just had one question in the chat box that if it is an intervention study, should we only take ethical approval at that time? No, it's not so. If you are doing any research involving human participants or their data or their sample, any kind of involvement, an ethics approval needs to be taken. So one has to go to the ethics committee. How the ICMR guidelines are is that in the main guideline document, as you see on the left, these are the 12 different sections of the guidelines: general principles, ethical issues. Responsible conduct of research is a new section that was added, which talks about how to conduct research. How does a scientist need to conduct research, ensuring integrity in research, publication ethics. So such issues, collaboration, have been discussed in this section. Then there is a whole section on ethical review procedures. The most important section for all of you to please kindly read is how ethics committees need to function, what are their roles and responsibilities, and how do they undertake their functions. Then there's a whole section on informed consent, dealing with people who are vulnerable. Then separate sections. The first 6 are more general sections, but the rest of the 6 are more specific. So for example, if you're involved in clinical trials, the section on clinical trial may be important. Similarly, sections on public health, socio-behavioral research, genetics, biobanking and data sets, and research during emergency disaster situations are these are the 12 sections. And in the new guidelines, the COVID-19 Ethics Committee guidelines, there are 5 sections. This is an add-on to the main document. It talks about general principles, general ethics issues, and then how altered ethics review procedures have to be taken, because before the pandemic, the ethics committee meetings had to be physical, the quorum had to be counted as to how many people were actually present in the room. But we had some changes in this requirement. And so this has been discussed. And then how do you take informed consent? Again, informed consent may be electronic. Of course, electronic consent has also been discussed in the 17 guideline, but now it has been further elaborated considering the social distancing norms that are now needed. And then dealing with people, additional vulnerabilities. We have come to know that, our healthcare workers are also vulnerable. We have migrant populations and other groups. Elderly have become very vulnerable. So we have to understand the increased vulnerabilities. And also at the end of this document, there is a SOP template that has been given. And so it talks about, so it is to help those ethics committees who do not have a template for doing an emergency review of research. So they can, adopt it, download it, and adopt this SOP template and use it along with the other ethics committee. This is the document, and we'll be happy to share with you copies. If you would like to, you can write to us. If you want physical copies, of course, you can download them freely from our website. The general ethical issues that have been discussed in the documents are related to how does an ethics committee carry out risk-benefit assessment. How do you weigh all the risks on one hand, and how do you list out all the benefits, and to see whether the risks and benefits benefit is, it can be acceptable ratio, so that the benefits are more than the risks that are there. And risk can be not only physical, that it's a blood draw or an intervention, a drug trial, but sometimes risk could be psychosocial. They could be, related to some expenditure that the person may have to incur, or related to the number of visits that a person has to make. So these are different types, and these have been discussed in detail. Since the topic for today is roles and responsibilities, I'm only telling about these in brief. Then there is the consideration about taking care of the private information, identifying information of the participants, how these are going to be stored, with whom they will be stored, with whom they can be shared, where they will be archived or kept. So all this is another consideration for ethics committee. Then the principle of distributive justice, which talks about, making sure that the people who are going to be included in research are also the ones who are going to be benefited out of it. It should not be so that, a particular group of people are targeted. People who are more vulnerable, or who don't understand the language, or who are not well educated, for the benefit of others. So we have to have a distributive principle justice in place, so that you make sure that you don't your research does not lead to any stigmatization or discrimination, any particular group, a cultural group, or an ethnic group, or a religious minority, or any such group. Then payment for participation is often confused with payment of compensation for injury. These are two different things. Payment for participation is whether, due to the participation, a person is incurring some expenditure, and whether those will be reimbursed in cash or kind. Is there any payment involved? All such payments need to be declared to the ethics committee, which the ethics committee has to see whether these are reasonable, these are acceptable. So on one hand, you want there should be some payments. On the other hand, you also want that this payment is not so huge that it becomes an undue inducement to a person to agree to participate. Then compensation for research-related harm. The ICMR guidelines of 2006 also said that payments, compensation should be made in case there is a research-related harm. However, now this issue has been, become a big issue, and now, at least in India, we have this provision. It is not there in many other countries, but this is a very important provision, that if there is a risk or a harm that has happened due to participation in research, that injury has happened, then compensation has to be provided. And for that, institutions are required to build corpus funds within their own institutions. Funding agencies can be requested to allocate certain amounts of money as a project grant that can be used in case compensation needs to be paid. And also insurance mechanisms have to be worked out, so that the participant does not have to suffer because of his participation in a research. Conflicts of interest issues are extremely tricky issues. They are always there. These are secondary interests, which can sometimes overcome the primary interest, which is research. And these could be academic, these could be financial, these could be personal kind of conflicts of interest, where because of your interest, it's your project or it's your friend's project, you may like to approve it, or you may like to disapprove it because you are in competition with your colleagues. So there are various types of issues, but the important thing is that conflicts of interest need to be declared and managed by the ethics committee. These can be at the level of the institution, where the institutional heads can give pressure on the ethics committee to approve a project. Or it could be, for example, at the level of the researcher. The researcher is getting a certain recruitment fees, a large amount of money coming in for each participant that is recruited in research. So these have to be declared. And also within the ethics committee members, there could be conflicts. Then there is the issue about community engagement. How do you engage with communities? How do you make sure that the research is helping out the people for whom you're working on? Sometimes many research is disconnected with the communities, and I think we have social scientists here today, and they can highlight it much better, how to engage with the people on whom you're going to do research, how to take their points into consideration while the research projects are being built. Then post-research access and benefit sharing. So at the time when the project is being conceived, at that time, to see whether at the end of the study, there is a need to share benefits, or there is a possibility that post-trial access could be provided to the new interventions or treatments or any other kind of modality that is being worked out as research. So this is again a clause that ethics committee has to see that whether a particular study can help or should include the clauses for post-trial benefits. Then storage of biological materials. So at the time the research is being planned, one has to see what will happen after this research is over. Can you store biological material, whether they are going to be used for future research? What about data sets, the clinical samples that are being collected? Can these samples be used for research later? So these provisions have to be built in right at the beginning rather than later, because then it becomes difficult if you have not taken appropriate informed consent. So this is an important issue. Then collaboration in research is very important. We all need to collaborate and do better research. But then when we collaborate, we must know what are the rights and responsibilities of the collaborating institutions. It could be within the country collaboration. It could be within the department collaboration. It could be within countries collaboration. So wherever there is collaboration, we need to understand the roles and responsibilities and whether there are signed agreements, MOUs, who will do what, responsibility sharing. Public health and socio-behavioral research has been discussed in detail, and also roles of, these are the new additions that were made in the COVID guidelines about the additional roles and responsibilities of government agencies, sponsors in governance of research during the pandemic situation, and ensuring biosafety in labs and hospitals, because we are dealing with a highly infectious agent. So these were the 2 points that were added. So coming to the ethics committees, we all know that ethics committees need to be independent. Now, what does independent ethics committee mean? It means independence in its decision-making, in the way it functions, without any pressure from anybody. They have to de-link themselves. You will be having another hat of a clinician or a researcher or whatever, but when you're sitting in an ethics committee, you have to make sure that you take unbiased review, unbiased decision-making, and be as transparent as possible and follow the guidelines so that you have a consistency in the way you're making decisions. It should not be your mood. If I'm in a good mood, I'm approving. If I'm not in a good mood, I'm not approving today. So it has to be really based on what are the facts, what are the guidelines, regulations of the country, what are the ethical requirements, and act independently. So ethics committees need to be independent. They need to be competent, which means that you have to do your review. You all are competent people, but you have to know how to do a good review in a time-bound manner. You have to be good. You have to do good quality research. So then the basic idea is to protect the participants. Now, it is very easy for us to say that you protect the participants, but you don't never, as ethics committee member, you don't directly interact with the participants at all. It is the researcher who is dealing directly with the participants. So from a distance, the ethics committee has to do an oversight in a manner or make suggestions to the researcher in such a manner that the researcher makes sure that the research is conducted well. And ethics committee has to also ensure not only the one-time review, but monitoring throughout. You take continuing review reports, find out what is happening. Are there any adverse events? Are there any adverse media reports or any other concerns that come to light that are affecting the safety or well-being of a research participant? Now, this is $1 million question all the time. Every meeting that I've attended, probably, whether ethics committees need to review science or they have to do only ethics. And there is a huge debate that's going on, because a lot of time a proposal is approved by a scientific committee. And when it comes to the ethics committee, there are again scientific questions raised. Yes, you are very right in raising scientific questions. The scientific questions have to be settled before, because unless they are settled, their ethics component would not be good. So scientific as well as ethical review have to go hand in hand. You cannot really separate them out. But the important thing is that often ethics committee only do scientific review and they forget about doing ethics review. And that is where the problem comes. So we have to do both the things and have an initial review, continuing review, monitoring, have to take decisions about ongoing studies, review of new non-COVID and new COVID-related research. And I have highlighted in red, educate, handhold, and support, because what happens is when you're sitting in the chair as an ethics committee member, you are sometimes very critical. This is not good, this is not right, this cannot be done. But this attitude, I think we have to work together, because as researchers, they have an interest in research. Ethics committees also have the same interest, good research. The funding agencies also have the same interest to promote good research. So basically, whether it is sponsors, whether it is researchers, whether it is ethics committee, we are all on the same side of the story. We want to do good research. We want to have good outcomes. We want to help society. We want to help science. So when we are working on the same, why are we having a disconnect with each other? That ethics researchers never like ethics committees. Unfortunately, I have to say that ethics researchers are always complaining against ethics committees, and ethics committees finding fault with researchers. So we need to come together, bridge that gap, talk to each other, so that ethics committee can tell what exactly they want, how they would like it, guide the researcher rather than saying this cannot be done, but to tell them with their constructive suggestions. And ethics committees need to be abreast with the latest, what is happening in the country at the national level, what are the new guidelines, regulations, as well as internationally what is happening, and also new publications, new scientific, like in COVID time, every day we had a new thing coming up. So we have to keep ourselves abreast. And all types of biomedical health research must be reviewed before they are initiated. So that's the last one. So ethics committee reviews, like I said, science and ethics, and ICMR guidelines have given what are the things that you need to review: social value, design, conduct, benefit risk, selection of participants, payments, privacy, confidentiality concerns, community considerations, qualifications of the investigator, site facilities available, conflicts of interest, medical management, compensation, informed consent process. So these, the kind of checklist that you need to go through. And an important role for the member secretary is, which will be discussed, is about planning to have scheduled or unscheduled meetings. Sometimes your meeting may be scheduled after 2 months. Can you wait? Can this research wait for 2 months? Or that delay will cost too much. So ethics committees may have to schedule meetings at urgent pace. I mean, at least in now times with the COVID. And then social distancing may not favor conventional methods of data collection. So researchers may propose new ideas, alternative designs for informed consent, for collecting data, for even for collecting the research, surveys or anything. So all these new considerations about confidential exchanges, GPS, IPS tracking, review by other ethics committees also should be looked at by the ethics committee if it's a multi-center research. And then timely review, looking at how consenting is to be done by electronic means or digital meetings, and other things have to be taken into consideration. Okay, so of course, I think you all know about it. You need to have SOPs and then stick to timelines. Video face-to-face meetings, we have found in our experience to be very good. Have shorter agendas when you're having digital meetings, but have the meetings more frequently. So ethics committees need to have appropriate budget, infrastructure, staff, protected time for the member secretary. Qualifications, affiliations, roles and responsibilities have been defined. Head of the institution in India should not be part of an ethics committee at all. And there are special situations where you could, a bigger institution may have more than one ethics committee, or you may have MOU with another ethics committee which can review your research, or multi-center research could be reviewed by one ethics committee. A common review can be done. Or sometimes there are independent ethics committees which could cater to the need of those who are not affiliated, private practitioners, for example, who do not have any affiliation to an institution. So there could be various subcommittees appointed by the main ethics committee. The new suggestions that came up in the guidelines was about having alternate members. So sometimes you have to have a meeting, but a particular member, let's say the legal expert is busy that day, not available. So if you have alternate members for each of the positions, then it is easy to have. These are voting members, they have full power. So you could have set of alternate members in, pre-decided, so that they can be invited when ethics committee meeting is to be there on an urgent basis. You could also have subject expert panel previously identified. So depending on what kind of research is your institution focused upon, you could identify a set of experts who could be invited in for peer review or invited to the meeting to give their opinion. They are non-voting members. They are not members of the ethics committee, but they can just tell, what is the scientific content and help resolve some of the scientific queries that may be there. Also, ethics committee may consider to invite community representatives or patient representatives, special invitees again for opinion. This is all to improve the process of the decision making. And with online meetings, at least we have found it to be very easy, because you could very easily invite anybody. You don't have to physically come. And the important qualities of members of ethics committee are their willingness to work, time and commitment, because often we see that, I should not say, but a lot of HODs I've seen in many medical colleges, HODs are ethics committee members, and they are very busy and they don't have time. They will just come in and they say, just for the sake of quorum, and then they'll go out and they are in and out of the meeting. So we need people who are committed, who will be able to review, devote time. So of course, the multidisciplinary composition is there. All these are the kind of members that could be there. And besides that, I think Dr. Mathur already mentioned about age, gender, affiliated, non-affiliated, members available of social, local, cultural norms, all these, and they have to sign confidentiality agreements, conflict of interest management, all of this. And they need training. All members of the ethics committee need training on basics of research methodology, designs. They should know what is a placebo, for example, how to handle conflicts of interest, what are the SOPs of the ethics committee, what are the review procedures that they are going to follow. So scientific soundness, ethical principles, detailed ethics review, I think you all know about it. And so I have already mentioned. And then each member, the ICMR guidelines have given what is it that each member has to review. So coming to the chairperson, he has to be non-affiliated, qualified, and ensure active participation and fair decision making, and handle complaints, conflicts of interest, etc. And there could be a vice chairperson also previously appointed, or you could co-opt if the chairperson is not available. And similarly, member secretary, he or she has to be an affiliated person with the institution, and a lot of responsibilities for the member secretary, because they have to receive, they have to have a checklist and see all the documentation is complete, prepare agendas, prepare minutes of the meeting, after the meeting, hold meetings, and decide about expedited reviews, exemption from reviews, full reviews, invite consultants if required, ensure quorums. So it's a lot of good work that the member secretary has to do. And then the basic medical scientist could be non-affiliated or affiliated, non-medical person or medical person with qualifications in basic medical sciences. And as per the Indian requirements, the regulations, if you're reviewing clinical trials, then it has to be preferably a pharmacologist, and they do scientific as well as ethics review about mainly intervention, design, methodology, statistics, SAEs, and other things. Then clinician, of course, very important role. It could be both affiliate or non-affiliated member with medical qualifications, expertise, training. For regulatory studies in India, you need a postgraduate qualification as a clinician, and they are responsible for doing the scientific initial review. Often a time, clinicians would be the primary reviewers for a protocol, and they have to look at the risk-benefit assessment, methodology, study designs, etc., violations, and in the due course progress reports and other things. And then also look at medical care management, compensation. The legal expert, again, can be affiliated or non-affiliated, should have degrees in laws and probably trainings in insurance and other things. They have to review informed consent document, MOUs, clinical trial agreements, and other regulatory approval documents, and so a lot of things. So from the regulatory perspective, the legal expert has to play a really important role in an ethics committee. They have to keep the members also updated about new regulations, if any, related to biomedical health research or clinical research. Then social scientists, philosopher, ethicist, theologian, these have been put as one in the ICMR guidelines. So these could be, again, affiliated, non-affiliated members with appropriate training and expertise, sensitive to the local cultural, moral, social values. They could be people who are working with non-governmental organizations in social welfare activities, and they need to review protocol as well as informed consent form and their translations, and look at the impact on community environment, look at it from the societal perspective, bring in all the societal concerns. And similarly, the lay person is a non-affiliated person, should be a literate person from the public or community, and the guidelines say that should not have pursued a health-related career for the last 5 years, and has to represent, be the voice of the participant, and a very important role to serve. the purpose of being a patient representative and bring in the ethical society concerns. So during the pandemic, ethics committees are required to do expeditious review. And I think all of this have been mentioned. The ICMR guidelines have talked about common review of multi-center research. So this is another thing that you need to explore. And there are various situations about having more committees or having subcommittees. Then decisions about ongoing research have been discussed, and review of new non-COVID research. I think I'm running out of time. Then informed consent, on the left-hand side, what you see are the basic elements that have to be there in any consent form. There are some additional elements that could be included. These are all there in the ICMR guidelines. I'm not giving any information that is out of that. And what is important is that there is meaningful disclosure. There is a comprehension or understanding, and the person has to be competent to understand before a consent is signed. So it is a process. And now we have talked about electronic consent, where you could use technology, digital formats. You could have a software or an app designed for that, or you could have through emails or through WhatsApp messages. You could, the important thing is how you record that the consent is coming from the right person. The main concern is that the ethics committee must ensure is that how it is going to be recorded to make sure that the procedures are being followed. Then waiver of consent has been discussed in the guidelines. So in situations where research cannot practicably be carried out and it is to be done, therefore, in such cases, waiver can be given. It could be, for example, retrospective analysis or anonymized records are there. You want to, you cannot go back to the participants. So in such situations, informed consent waiver could be given. The other important things to see for an ethics committee is about translations for informed consent form, deciding if a particular study needs a test of understanding, whether the person has understood, and have time for discussions. People who are vulnerable need to be included in research, and they should not be as a blanket excluded from research. It is important to also conduct research on them so that the benefits of the research apply to these groups of people. So it is important to see there are additional protections in place, and ethics committee has an important responsibility in understanding if this particular study will involve vulnerable populations and how to make sure these people can be protected. And along with them, safety of healthcare workers during the COVID time, and also looking at their mental and social health needs and psychosocial support need to be given often at times. So these are the things addressed. And this is the SOP that I mentioned for research during emergency. Please download it from our website in case you do not have. Then ICMR has recently, in 2018, come up with the common forms. And so these are very useful tools. You can just download them and put your logo. We have not put our logo here. You just download, apply to your own. This document will help ethics committee in streamlining their ethical review process, because it makes the researcher think about what are the ethical issues involved. Often a time, ethics committees return back the proposal because the documentation is not complete or certain information is missing. From our experience in ICMR also, when we receive proposals for grant, we find that people write under the ethical considerations, they would just say ethical approval will be obtained. Now that's not enough. The researcher has to tell the ethics committee in what ways, what are the ethical issues, and in what ways he or she will be taking care of them. So this form will help in this process. There are several forms. It is not only the main initial review, but expedited review forms, continuing review, amendments, and other forms are there. So I just thought I'll tell you one brief about the Central Ethics Committee, which serves as the National Ethics Committee, which is a DG appointed committee, which had done a lot of review, and Dr. Muthuswamy and Dr. Arora, they are the chairpersons of the committee. And this committee met several times, and we were able to do very fast track research of the variety of research proposals that ICMR had reviewed, and of different types of research. So we found that the virtual meetings were found to be very useful, good connectivity, and seems like the new normal. So, and this is just the data showing you that the COVID guidelines have been downloaded, more than 3,000 copies from our NCDIR website by more than, it is almost 46 countries across the world. Of course, from India as well, they have been downloaded. And lastly, there is a registry for ethics committee at CDSU. for all those ethics committees that review clinical trials, but all the other ethics committees, as well, all ethics committees actually are also required to register with on the NETIC portal, which is the Department of Health Research registry, which has been recently formed from 2019 in accordance to the new drugs and clinical trial rules. So your ethics committees are required to be registered with DHR. It is now mandatory. And this is just a little data about today that, we have representation from various backgrounds of people. We have chairpersons, member secretaries, all backgrounds. We have philosophers, ethicists, theologians. Total ethics committee members who registered today was 500 plus. Plus we had other ethics committee members. These are from the secretariat or coordinators of the ethics committee. And there are non-ethics committee members also. Primarily, of course, this is for EC members, but there are some researchers also who are attending the program today. And this is just to show you the distribution from various states. We have representation from almost all the states in the country. And with that, I would like to end. And thank you all very much. I once again urge you all to, visit our website and for downloading these documents, or write to us for copies of the guidelines. Thank you all very much. I think we will be taking the question answers only later. So I think I'll request Dr. Shilpi to go ahead with the next. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing the details of the ethical guidelines with us. Thank you. We will now be having a poll session. A poll question will appear on the screen and all the participants can participate in poll by clicking an option. I would request you all to be prompt and actively participate in the poll. So here is the first question for today. So my hospital has case files of patients who've been treated for COVID-19. I'm interested in analyzing the treatment outcomes of COVID-19 from the case files and publishing the findings. So most of the people have participated in the poll, and the right answer for the poll is the proposal has to be submitted for ethics committee review, the second one, which most of you have answered. Coming to the next question. Research which does not directly benefit the research participant is known as therapeutic, non-therapeutic, unethical, or unlawful. The correct answer is B, non-therapeutic, and most of you've got it right. So moving forward, the next session for today, let's quickly cruise along with the proceedings of the meeting. The highlight of today's program is the panel discussion, which will have a plethora of experts who are going to be sharing their valuable experiences. The session will be chaired by Dr. Vasanta Muthuswamy and co-chaired by Dr. N.K. Arora. It is indeed a great pleasure to introduce ma'am. I'm profusely elated as I do so, and words fall short as I introduce her. She retired as Senior Deputy Director General, Scientist Chief from Indian Council of Medical Research and is presently the President of Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India and Chairperson of ICMR Central Ethics Committee on Human Research. She has colossal contributions, and we thank you, ma'am, for gracing the program with your presence. The session will be co-chaired by Dr. N.K. Arora. He is the Executive Director of the England Trust International and the Chairperson of the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization for COVID-19 vaccine rollout in India. He is also the President, AIMS Patna and Deoghar. Sir, it's an honor to have you with us today. We also have an esteemed panel of other experts who have joined us today for an academic feast, and I will be introducing them briefly. So first we have with us Dr. Urmila Thatte. She's an emeritus professor, Department of Clinical Pharmacology, Seth GS Medical College and Chem Hospital, Mumbai. And she will be sharing with us today her experience as a chairperson of an EC. We welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Naresh Gupta is the former director professor, Maulana Azad Medical College, Delhi, and President, Health Environment Foundation. He will be shedding light on his role as a clinician member of an ethics committee. Hearty welcome to you, sir. Dr. Dennis Xavier is the professor of pharmacology and head Division of Clinical Research and Training, St. John's Research Institute, and he has joined us today in his role as pharmacologist and basic scientist member of an ethics committee. A warm welcome to you, sir. Next, we have with us Dr. B.T. Kaul, who is an advocate with the Delhi High Court as well as Supreme Court of India, and he is the former chairperson, Delhi Judicial Academy. We look forward to listening to him as a legal expert member of Ethics Committee. Thank you, sir. Now we have with us Dr. Shalini Bharat. She's Director and Vice Chancellor, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and Professor, Center for Health and Social Sciences, who will be sharing her valuable experiences as social scientist member of an ethics committee. We welcome you, ma'am. Most of you would know Dr. Nandini K. Kumar, who is the former Deputy Director General, Senior Grade, Indian Council of Medical Research, and Vice President for Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India. And she will be emphasizing on the role of an ethicist member of an ethics committee. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. I'm happy to introduce Ms. Harmila Gupta, who is the founder president, Can Support, an NGO, and herself a cancer survivor. She'll be elucidating the role of a layperson and a patient representative member in an ethics committee. We welcome you, ma'am. Next, we have with us Dr. Siddharth Laskar, who is professor, Department of Radiation Oncology, Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. And he will be sharing his experiences from the perspective of a member secretary of an ethics committee. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Prashant Mathur, he's Scientist G and Director of ICMR National Center for Disease Informatics and Research, Bengaluru, and he will be sharing his experience as the head of the institute and appellate appointing authority of an ethics committee. We welcome you, sir. Now, let me introduce Dr. Banu Rekha, who is Scientist E at ICMR National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis, NIRT Chennai, and she will be giving insights on the role of as a researcher and the challenges encountered in applying to an EC. We welcome you, ma'am. Finally, we have Dr. Roli Mathur, Scientist F and head ICMR Bioethics Unit in the role of an ICMR representative for this session. We welcome you, ma'am. It's time to listen to this eminent panel of speakers, and I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Vasanta Muthuswamy and Dr. N.K. Arora to take charge as chairperson and to introduce the session. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shilpi. A very good morning to all of you. It's wonderful to see more than 600 participants who are here participating in today's session. As you all heard, that we had an overview of the whole session and the role of ethics committees from Dr. Prashant Mathur, and details about the ICMR guidelines, both the national guidelines 2017 and the new guidelines for the COVID-19 ethics review from Dr. Roli Mathur. Now, as you heard in the beginning itself, that we decided today that we are not going to have individual lectures from everybody. What is important is that the entire members of the ethics committees are present here, representatives. And when we send the registration, we had, of course, more than 800 registrations. We asked people to submit questions to us. We had we were just there was an overflow of questions. There were more than 200, 300 questions which had come from all the registered participants. It was very difficult for us to go through them and select few questions which are repeatedly being asked for. People are asking for, looking for answers from this panel. Now, all of us, so what we are going to do now is that We are going to ask the panelists initially. Each panelist is expected to tell that their specific role in the committee is known. We have said that we are having chairperson, member secretary, and we are representative from each of the designated member of the committee, the chair, the clinicians, the basic scientists, the lawyer, the social scientists, the layperson, the ethicist, everybody. So what we want is each one of you, when one by one we'll take up everybody. First, we'll say that what is the challenge which you faced in the particular role which you are representing in the committee, and how did you overcome the challenge, and what was the solution which had come out. And once you give that, then I am going to ask you questions. Initially, I'm going to just ask you 2 questions only, because we are having large number of questions. 2 hours is not sufficient to ask questions from 12 people. There are 12 panelists. So I'm just going to ask initially 2 questions, and then depending on the time, we may take up more questions. And then, of course, I'm also seeing that already in the question answer, there are more than 100 questions I have already put in there. And of course, some of the questions seem to be a repetition of what has already been submitted, but there are some new questions also. We'll take it up later on. Just to give just an introduction for the whole thing, that everybody knows, since we have large number of members. There are also those are non-EC members are there, and there are many EC members who are recent members who are new to this. Just to give a background, that in the early 60s, the ethics committees were dominated only by the physicians, clinicians, and the scientists. We didn't have other people in the committee because they thought that scientific research has to be reviewed by the scientists, only they know about it. So if you see the history of the development of the ethics committees, or what is called the institutional review boards in the Western countries, you will see only the scientists and the clinicians were members. But when we started having the dialysis machines in the 60s, and later on in the 70s, there were a lot of questions were raised about the withdrawal and withholding of the life support system. The heart-lung machines were discovered, and then we had all these life support systems were put in position. And then there was a dilemma faced by the medical community as to whether to how to take decision, when do you withdraw support, withhold support, and when you have large number of people for organ transplantation waiting in the queue, do you go only by the queue system, or you going to jump over the queue and select some people? And that is the time, although the clinical aspects, what is the one which is decided that we should have a multidisciplinary committee at that point of time, that this should feel that scientists and the physicians alone cannot take decision. You have to understand the philosophy behind it. You have to understand the value of a human being. And that value of a human being, when you ask the scientists and the clinicians, they have their own vested interest and the scientific way of looking into that. So we need the philosophers, we need the legal experts, and we need the social scientists who understand the community better. And we, of course, have the patients' representatives or the lay people. So all this, the other members of the non-medical members of the committee or the non-scientific members of the committee came into existence, became member of the ethics review boards and ethics committees only in the late 70s or in the 80s. So before 80s, we didn't have all these different members are there. So although it has started from the 80s, of course, still there were committees that were functioning, mainly with all the scientists and the physicians only, until we came out with repeated guidelines, and slowly the guidelines become the legally it has to be followed, and people then decided that yes, all the committees have to be properly set up. Now with the registration mechanism happening in this country, from 2013 we have the CDSCO registration, from 2019 we have the DHR registration. Now it has become mandatory that unless you have this multidisciplinary committee with all the details and the members are trained in this, because just each one of us are expert in our own field, what we are qualified in our life. But then when it comes to reviewing a proposal from the ethics perspective, we are not experts in that. We need the help of others. We need the guidance from others. And we have to understand that what do we mean by the scientific review and what is mean by the ethics review and what is the difference. And that is where the training is needed, because we can be expert in one, we cannot be expert in everything. And this is an area which is too new to all of us. All of us have never been taught about the ethics review from the beginning. Ethics itself is not in the part of the curriculum till recently. Even now, it's not completely mandatory. So this is an area about which we are not aware. And that's the reason, as was told by both Dr. Mathur and both the Mathurs, that the people keep on talking scientific review, and there is very little time for the ethics review. So with this entire background, we thought that it is better to hear from the horse's mouth. as to what is the problem which they face, how did they handle it, and so that, of course, the questions which are there will be asked to them. So I just wanted to give this brief background. And my co-chair, Dr. Arora, will be joining at little day due to his other commitments. He will join at any time. So till he joins, I will I'll be taking up the questions for all the members. Now let me just start the questions. And as I said, we are going to start with the chairpersons and the member secretary. Once we did with these two positions, and then we'll go to the other experts. Now, my first question is to Dr. Urmila Thatte. First, Dr. Urmila, I would like to ask you about your experience, the challenge which you faced as a chair, because you've been a member of number of ethics committees, chairperson, as well as member secretary. You have very vast experience. But here as a chairperson, what are the challenge which you have faced in your experience, and how did you handle it? Once you say that, I'll put the questions to you. Yes, Dr. Urmila.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, it was muted. Yes. Ma'am, according to me, the biggest challenge of a chairperson is dominating members, individuals who may be very dominant and who tend to overcome any argument, any suggestion, anything that is said by anybody else. And if the chairperson isn't strong enough or powerful enough to overcome that strong person, then it becomes impossible to get the participation of the rest of the committee members. And one of the biggest jobs of a chairperson, according to me, is to get the participation of all members of the committee. So to ensure that everybody, the non-technical members, participate in the meeting, according to me, that is the main role of the chairperson. And that is the biggest challenge, to get everybody's participation. And the biggest challenge is the dominant member, the one clinician or somebody, who thinks he knows everything. He knows ethics and he knows science and he knows clinical medicine, he knows everything. And therefore, anything that he says has to be listened to. So that is something that we need to, we really, as a chairperson, need to worry about. And how have I overcome it? Yeah. I have overcome it mainly by being strong and by insisting, and politely, and not at all rudely, but politely insisting on the participation of everybody else, and to allow these other people to talk also. So politeness and firmness are two important characteristics of a chairperson. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Urmila. That's absolutely correct. I'm sure this is the experience of many of the people who are EC members, that how it is dominated by some people. Now I'm putting two questions to you. You can answer one by one. The first question is that, how do you do the time management of looking into the scientific review and the ethics review? I think this is a point which Rolly also had raised. Yes, you have to do the scientific review as well as ethics review. This is the double responsibility of ethics committees, although many people are unhappy that the ethics committee reviews science. But how do you do an effective time management to see that the majority of the time is not taken away by your dominant scientists, and then you get very little time for the other non-technical members to discuss the ethics issues?
Usually the discussion begins with the scientific members. Usually that is how it works, because they have their comments, and then, however, we always, as a chairperson, insist on the non-technical members also giving their contributions, and we ensure that they contribute as well to the discussion. So that is how, and if anything is becoming, worrisome, that is, if any point is being debated far too much without coming to any conclusion, I often put it to vote so that we come to a conclusion and the point is deliberated and finished off. Otherwise, we could discuss till the cows come home, and it would never end. But that's how I do it, at least. I put a point to vote if it becomes too much discussed and debated and too much overcome. So I manage the time.
Yes,
basically
you have, of course, you have already answered the second question that was there. which is of course very important, because initially, of course, when we planned to have this entire workshop, the recommendation was that we should have a separate workshop only for the non-medical, non-scientific members of the ethics committees, because they have to understand their roles, they have to be given time. But we thought that unless both the committee members are together and discuss this, there's no point in having it only for the non-medical members. So we made it as a workshop for the role of members, both scientific and the non-scientific. So how do you ensure, of course, you have said partly that the non-medical members, generally they are so awed by the scientists in the committee, they don't open their mouth. How do you see that they get involved and they feel that they are part of the committee, and their response and their recommendation is in fact much more important from the ethics perspective? Once the science is good, what is the ethics perspective that has to come from the non? So how do you see that?
I generally
ask
the people. I ask the people by name. Can you give your comments? Can you, social scientists, can you give your comments? And then go through each of the non-technical members, including the layperson. Please give your comments. So then they are sort of put on the spot and they have to give some comments. That's how I do it. Now, when it is virtual, it's a little difficult because they don't see me all the time. But when it used to be in-person meetings, it was much easier.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Urmila. There are, of course, some more questions are there. Of course, if there is time, we'll come back to you. Okay. Now I move on to Dr. Laskar, Dr. Siddharth Laskar as Member Secretary. Yeah, you can first tell the biggest challenge you faced, and then I'll put the questions to you.
Well, thank you for organizing this. I have a disclaimer here that I finished my term as a member secretary about 4 years back. But I feel what you learn and what you do as a member secretary is much more than what is written in the SOPs. So when I took over as the member secretary, and there were multiple challenges that I faced. I can go on and on. But if I have to tell you one big challenge that I faced in the beginning was to try and understand the SOPs. And at that point in time, there was a rapid change and the SOPs were changing very rapidly. That's the time when we have these new compensation rules and the new gazette notifications that were coming. So we were rapidly changing our SOPs within the institution to comply with the national guidelines. So number one was to try and educate myself. And I think one of the most important virtues that a member secretary should have is to be knowledgeable about the subject, to be aware of what is happening, the rules. And that was a big challenge for me. But I was lucky that I had alongside me Dr. Thatte as my chairperson. So I did learn a lot of things. And of course, there was a lot of efforts that I had to put in to learn and keep pace with the changing SOPs. So that was the biggest thing. And of course, there's a whole lot of other things that a member secretary needs to do in terms of keeping the right balance, keep sticking to time, checking all the documents that come into the IEC, keeping the team together, interpreting the right things in the right way and documenting in the right way so that the meaning remains the same, passing on information to the right people on time, and engaging people in the discussions. That was another thing. So there were multiple things, but I think keeping pace with the SOPs was the main thing at that point in time. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. The question, one other question which many people are asking is that, do you require any special qualifications or training to become a member secretary of an ethics committee?
No, absolutely no. Certain things, in my opinion, come automatically. As a scientist, as a researcher, as a human being, there are certain things that need to be there. And when I was asked to prepare for this meeting, I asked myself this question, and I actually jotted down 10 points that a member secretary should have, which is actually not defined in any guideline or policies. I can tell you 10 quick points, and I will take less than 15 seconds to tell you that. So we know all the responsibilities that a member secretary has. And in order to accomplish all these responsibilities in the right and effective way, there are 10 commandments, in my opinion, that one should have. What are these? Number one, knowledge, I spoke to you about. Number two, the one should be efficient and have a good decision-making skill, quick and efficient, and you should be able to decide quick. You cannot go on and on, like Dr. Thatte mentioned. You have to have good analytical skills. Sometimes you can make out during the meetings that the discussion is going or getting lopsided in a particular direction. You need to be able to catch that and re-guide the discussion and engage people in the right way. You have to have balanced thinking. You cannot be biased. You cannot be biased with opinions even before the meeting starts. So you have to be balanced. You have to have good communication skills. Sometimes people understand things, but they are not able to convey the right things in the right way. So communication skills is extremely important as a member secretary. You communicate to the researchers, with the members, with your chairperson, with other people. You have to have good interpersonal skills too. Sometimes you can tick somebody off in the wrong way, but here you have to maintain the dignity, maintain the decorum, at the same time remain focused. So that is again very important. Etiquettes. Now it is not only ethics, I think it is etiquettes also. How you sit, where you sit, what is your body language, when you are discussing, how much respect you are giving to the discussion that is going on. Sometimes, it is sad to see that a researcher comes and presents a project and most people would be sitting and fiddling around with their mobile phones. That should not happen. Or you should not be munching away on some food. You give the due respect to that individual. And it is our responsibility as a member secretary and of course the chairperson to guide things in that right direction. So etiquette's very important. Leadership qualities. So you're not only doing the meetings while the meeting is happening. You are doing something before the meeting happens. You have to push the members or the people working in the ethics committee, not in the ethics committee, people working in the IEC to do their activities in the right way. And finally, I think that individual should be a relatively respected individual in the institution, so that it gives a sense of confidence amongst the individuals in the IEC and also amongst the researchers, that if this individual is the member secretary, it is most likely that the things will not go wrong, they will not be biased, the interpretations will be right, and the things will be efficiently communicated without delays. So I think these are the 10 main things that I understood over the 4 years of my tenure as a member secretary in the TMC IRB.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siddharth. Very well said. Another question which many people are raising is, of course, you also the only organization, I think, which has got all the accreditation, all registration. I think that's the only institute perfect. Anything which comes up new is accepted by the Tata, and then you go through that exercise. So many people have raised the question that while registering for the CDSCO registration of the ethics committee or registration with the DHR, which is now happening, many other member secretaries feel they're finding it very difficult in the registration process. They are not able to understand. Now, how did you, but yours is one organization which I find has done all these things very well. So yes. Can you say that how did you face these registrations without much difficulty, or did you face difficulties in doing that?
So I would say the catch is to have the right people in the right place, a motivated group of people. Documentation in the right way is the way to go in ethics and research. So I was present at the time of the CDSCO registration that we had. I was not there now, but at that time we did not have a problem. And that was because we anyway had gone through a process of our AHARP accreditation, the SIDCR accreditation. So we had gone through the grind. We had our SOPs in place. Our people were trained and our people were motivated. And of course, we had the support of the administration wherever we needed an infrastructure support. I can understand that we are in a privileged organization where we have a wonderful 4,000 square feet area for our ethics committee. We have our own dedicated ethics committee room. We have our ethics committee. We have 3 ethics committee administrators. We have ethics committee assistants to help them. We have, boys and peons to, help them out. And we also have a very strong IT support system. So right now, as I understand, at least when I was there, we were not fully electronic in our submissions and reviews. And currently we have completely transformed to electronic submissions, reviews, continuing review applications. So they've got multiple advantages of that. So of course that requires money, that requires infrastructural support, but we were privileged to have, and probably that's the reason we have done all accreditations and everything in TMH.
Thank you so much. I think this also calls for the commitment from your management. And
Yes.
I remember very well when when we started it, I went to Dr. Dinsha and told her, unless ethics committee has a separate office, they cannot function properly. And the very next day, she allotted the present place, which
Yes.
is the IEC office. So I remember it very well. So commitment for the highest level is what is important for a good functioning of an ethics committee. And thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Siddharth.
Thank you.
I now move on to the clinician, Dr. Naresh Gupta. Dr. Gupta, yes, like others, I would like to first hear from you as your challenge as a clinician, which you felt in the committee, and then I'll put the questions to you. Please unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Gupta?
Yeah. Can you,
yeah.
you
Now,
hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
To allow me a few seconds to thank you, Dr. Vasanta and Dr. Roli Mathur, to give me this opportunity to share my experience. I am on half a dozen ethics committees for many, many years, and I've learned a lot. But more than that, you have given me an opportunity to meet persons, the illustrious ones behind the screen, whom I never met earlier, or some of them I met, not all of you. And more so, I would like to make a mention of Dr. Harmala Gupta. I'm reminded, I think it was about a decade back, that on William Mark, there is a ground. And I used to go for a run to Nehru Park. So one day I saw a crowd and they said, there is a marathon. Who is doing it? Somebody is doing it. Can Support is doing it. And I ran that marathon. They gave me a t-shirt. I put it on. And then I came back and found out about her. But today you gave me an opportunity to meet her. And that's very important to me. Thank you so much. I hope you're doing well, Dr. Hamla. Now you ask me, what do I learn? I learn something every day. And let me start with what Dr. Roli Mathur said. Ethics researchers don't like ethics committees. And Dr. Vasanta, you said in the 1960s, it were only physicians who were running it. I think they actually were running it because they were the culprits. If you go back to the 50s, they were the culprits. And that culprit nature was tamed with the ethics committees, but they would never be tamed. And even in this 2020, I'm still learning that I face the biggest challenge from clinicians. You would be surprised. The clinicians come and they're looking for hard facts. They're looking for end results which will make their research acceptable, their drugs acceptable, whatever they do. And they go anywhere. Just to share example, like we got recently a project where they would want to do it for a heart patients, bad quality heart patients, they would like to do angio. Now that's a very standard procedure. But this angiography, you put a dye. Now this dye is not to be given to those persons who have got an advanced kidney disease. They said, since nobody in the world has done it, we will do it. But how will you regulate that it is not allowed because this can damage the kidney even more? Patient can die. They say, no, we have no protocol, no SOP for how we will regulate. The person who is doing it will decide how much dose to give. Now, believe me, it went to several levels. It's not our ethics committee alone. It went to scientific bodies also, and I had to re-refer it to different institutions, but they would not agree. It's very difficult. I also was looking at a question which you said there are hundreds of them. And one of the projects that came to us was, and it was actually presented to us, the title of the project, the objectives of the project, and the methodology of the project had no synchrony. They talked absolutely different things. We said the least you can do is we can streamline it so that it becomes uniform. They said no. We said your title does not fit into anything. Change that at least. It is such a generic one. You know what was the reply we got? we got a reply that a very big funding agency has already funded it and we cannot change the title. He said there is nothing sacrosanct. You can change the title. So I think amongst the SOPs and the regulations that we have come up with, we must remember that all these regulations, the SOPs, have been done by human beings. And there is nothing sacrosanct that if there is a mistake that comes to the fore, one should not be able to correct it, but they would not do it. So the point I'm making is not that you make the clinicians shut up. That would not be as good. But I think we need to educate the clinicians. We need to bring them on the same front. Let me share one thing which is not related to ethics, but it brought me into ethics. Actually, I came into ethics when I joined AIMS in '71. And if you would remember, that was the time it was not even called ethics. It was called humane treatment and words like that. There were so many books on humane treatment because the responsibility and liability was thought to be only of the clinician. Now, once you move in, I also realized one more thing, and that was in our terminology, we call it patient empowerment. So I run a very big hemophilia center also. It is world's largest. And one thing we realized was you have to empower them. And I have learned the same thing from my interaction with ethics committees. I've actually extended it to the ethics committees, that empowerment of all the members is very crucial and very critical. We must do it. We should never think so-and-so has got a legal degree, so-and-so has got a medical degree, so-and-so has got a pharmacology degree. It has no meaning. And Dr. Rowley, I go a step further. I was carefully listening to your presentation that layperson should be, at least, we expect that the layperson should be educated. I have learned that formal education has nothing to do with it. We have an empowerment program. We call them self-help group also, empowerment programs. And I've learned that those who have no basic education, they are so reasonable when you tell them the truth. So I think empowerment is so important, and that can take it really forward in a very meaningful way. One is you take it forward on a file way. One is you take it forward on a meaningful way. Yes. As a scientist, there are many things that we have to look into the protocol. I can go on to that if you give me a few minutes.
Yeah, that's the question to you is the next question. The question to you is, yes, as a scientist, a clinician member of an ethics committee, what is it which you look in the protocol? Okay, that's one main question. What are the things which you see? Because there will be varieties of protocols, may not be of your own specialization, but what do you essentially look into that? And the second is that as a clinician member of the committee, how do you see and explain this proposal so that the non-medical members of the committee can understand it? Because when the scientists become primary reviewers and start presenting, they talk so much of science, the non-scientific members are totally, they don't know what to do, what they are understand. Anyway, the protocol itself is difficult for them to understand. Then the clinician who is a primary reviewer, when they started explaining, they make it even more difficult. So how do you see, what do you see and how do you explain it so that the non-technical members of the committee can easily understand what you are explaining?
So I think, Dr. Vasanta, I would like to answer the second one first, so that what I say as a clinician is not misunderstood. So how do you make every member on the level platform? So what we did in some of our committees was that every proposal that comes must come with a front page which carries a summary in a language that can be understood by a lay person. We have not been successful 100% of the times, but it is a good beginning. So I would say the PI, when they're submitting a project, they must have a front page which is for the lay persons. Technical terms to be avoided or to be simplified or to be defined, but don't make it too long and put it in such a perspective that they understand it. And I attribute this quality to all the clinicians. Clinicians have been taught time and again, you understand a surgery, you understand a disease only when you can explain it to your landlady's daughter. And if you can't do that, you are no good. Doctor translates it to teacher. So I think that one of the first things is you put a summary page. And as my predecessor said, I fully agree that everybody should be allowed to speak. And in fact, we can go in sequence. So you start from one end, like what you are doing. Let's give an opening statement opportunity to everyone. So let's go from one end and run it all around. And third, which I have been saying, empowerment of everybody is very important. And nobody, whether you're medical or non-medical or scientist or non-scientist, nobody should think that there is anything which is beyond her grasp. So I think once we do that, they all come on the forefront. And once the ice is broken and they are allowed to speak and hear, that brings us to this level playing field. And we have found that they open up. And in fact, then they ask more questions because they want to learn more. Now, the second thing you asked, or the first thing that you asked was, as a scientist, what do you look for? Yeah. I think scientists have got a great role. And if you start from the document right from the beginning to the end, so first we look at whether there is synchronicity between, as I was saying, between the title, the objectives, and the methodology. There are times you find that just out of tune. That is not allowed. They must understand, and this is for all the persons, clinicians and non-clinicians. Any document which has been submitted to ethics committee, see it in the light that if this document is given to a non-qualified person, let's say I tell them, I give it to my undergraduate second year student, will she be able to carry out the project the way you want it to be based on your documentation? So see that there is synchronicity amongst the different components, see that the methodology can be carried out. Now let's go further. Sample size is something that is often overlooked and never calculated properly. It's a very important requirement. The methodology you must see is not going to do any harm to your individual. So it's not a question of, okay, no, it does not make a difference. So what if you're doing it? Doing no harm to the subject is of prime importance. Whether the good is done or not is not important. Primum non nocere is a basic dictum every doctor has learned right from the first day of his first medical school year. Then we must look into the scientific validity. I just gave you a couple of examples of how one is wanting to do because they want to go forward. I can take it a step further. During these COVID times, there are these trial studies going on for COVID vaccine, for example. Now, when we do a trial for a vaccine, we know that there is no alternative available. There are times when there is an alternative available and it's a reasonably good alternative. And somebody says, I will compare it against a control. Not ethical, not ethical. So you have to think twice. Even in COVID, what we are doing is we are comparing it against those group of population that do not want to take the vaccine for one reason or the other. But then they are observing the other COVID appropriate behavior. They are protecting themselves. And that's being given to the vaccine also. So when you are looking at it, this statistical analysis must define upfront what we are looking for. Very often what happens is we draw the conclusions and the beneficiary conclusions at the end of the study. Whereas in scientific methods, they must be defined upfront as to what you're going to do, what will be your significant values, what is your primary endpoint, those kind of things. Like in this COVID example, you must define what is the efficacy you're speaking of if you're doing all the appropriate behavior also against the controls who are also doing appropriate behavior. So I think the scientific validity should not stop only at the title, objectives, or the methodology or the sample size, but also in the statistical analysis. One important domain that comes and that is often neglected, you mentioned it about the informed consent, we heard it also, it really has to be truly informed consent. The clinicians still are under the impression that if you have taken a signature, that is the end. But then that is the reason why we want a documentary consent also and a verbal consent also, a recorded consent also. But more important thing that where I've seen a lacuna is what we call the patient or the subject information sheet. So like what you said, how do you make other members learn? This can also come from that subject information sheet, which is a part of the document. Remember, subject information sheet is something which is going to the lay person. If layperson can understand it, every member of this of the committee can also understand it. But that is where the deficiency is there to a large extent, because they don't put it up, or it is not put it up honestly, saying that, oh, most of the time it is okay, so there is not a problem. You do a small surgery and you do a cataract surgery, these are all fine. So we don't put in the side effects. So explaining those kind of things in the PIS would also be important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can
you have
a couple of other things.
You had anything more to add? Okay. Thank you so much. The main purpose is, yes, the question, I think, why it is being put is many times in a committee, the clinicians think their job is to look at the science part of it. They don't realize that an ethics committee member, you are not there to look at science also, science only, you have to look at the ethics also. So many scientists have a feeling the non-medical members are there, it's their responsibility to look into the ethics. I as a scientist sitting in the committee will look into the science. That's not right. You have, so as nicely explained by you, as a scientific clinician member of the committee, you look at the science part of it, the different, how they are going to do, the procedures, everything. You also look into the ethics part of it, they're looking at the informed consent and the participant information sheet, etc. Because you can understand this better. What is scientifically is being talked about is whether it is getting projected into the patient information sheet for the patient to understand, or the participant to understand what is exactly being done. So that is also, the scientist has a double role, which many places, many times people don't realize that. They think that yes, the science they will explain, the rest of it they don't even talk about it. That's not there. Every member has to look into the ethics also. So thank you so much.
Yes.
We move on now to Dr. Dennis Xavier as a basic scientist. Yes, Dr. Dennis, like others, you can tell your challenge first and then I'll put the questions to you.
Thank you very much, madam, and thanks to ICMR for this opportunity as well. So I have been part of several ethics committees and I've played different roles, including that of a chairperson. But I also have another, perhaps a unique experience from St. John's for about 21 years now. We have run multi-center studies, and therefore that gave me an opportunity initially to deal with about 150 different ethics committees, people who were very experienced, people who were starting up, people who are good and people who are otherwise too, right? So maybe I will share that. In fact, I wrote a long list of challenges and solutions, but Dr. Naresh and Dr. Siddharth, very nicely put these points across. So I'll either avoid repeating or I'll mention it very briefly. So one of the key things is appropriate and equitable participation by all the members. And this issue about some people, particularly clinicians and sometimes lawyers too, dominate. They just put a spoke in everything. No, this is not okay, that is not okay. So I've seen that happening. So I think there must be equitable participation, and if you have a chairperson like Dr. Urmila Thate, I mean that would help a great deal. So a chairperson makes a big difference here.
No,
another
Dr.
thing that
Dennis, 1 minute. Mainly, see here today you are representing here as a basic scientist of the committee, okay? So your experience of being a basic scientist in the committee, that is what you were to say. The other things, of course, the others have also said that. Here your role today as a basic scientist. So can you just focus more on that? Yeah.
Sure. Yes, that is my second point. Yeah. Second point is, basic scientists usually are from, pre or paraclinical departments. And, fortunately, since I was trained in research methods, I did not have that problem in any of the ethics committees that I had. But what I have seen elsewhere is that these people are quite passive. They don't participate much. So what is expected of a basic scientist? Usually there are pharmacologists, microbiologists, even anatomy, biochemistry, whatever. They're all, experienced or knowledgeable. So I think adequate learning, this is a solution, I would say, adequate time that they need to spend. And there's nothing wrong in, before the meeting, calling up a few clinicians and asking them, or even to maintain confidentiality, call only the clinicians who are part of the, committee and asking. So that is a solution I would recommend. And also to speak, a basic scientist also expected to know, research methods, including biostatistics. And this is a requirement now. Previously, not much training was given, but now fortunately in India, training is available. people. So although personally I didn't have these challenges, but I've seen other basic scientists, just being, playing a passive role. So details about the drugs, details about the disease, the procedures, clinical pathological situations, as well as research methods, they can contribute by being more active, So I'll stop here. Maybe if there's an opportunity, that there's a unique kind of a challenge that I had faced on the other side, helping several of our centers and multi-center studies, apply to their ethics committees. And one of the problems that our investigators came back and said, and there are many ethics committee members on this group, is that, a typical thing is, one member does not like me, and therefore my project is being stalled. So in our project, where we have, it's run in 35 or 50 centers, most centers have got the approval, but this center, they're going on asking questions back and forth. Unfortunately, ethics committees becoming political committees, and when my time comes, I'll give it back to you, that kind of a thing. So we need to separate personal issues, political issues, and getting back or taking revenge. These will have to be removed. So again, a possible solution here, when we declare conflict of interest, one of the conflicts is either I like a person or I don't like a person. Like sometimes when we send to some of the journals, when we send our papers, they ask us, is there any reviewer you do not want us to send this to? Similarly, maybe the chairperson or member secretary can, consider this, if there has been a problem, and sometimes they can make out, one member not happy with a particular department as a whole, and then they keep on asking unreasonable questions. So these will have to be avoided. One other way, to make sure everybody participates is, taking turns to present, and maybe, and this was a great idea that I think Dr. Siddharth as well as Dr. Naresh mentioned earlier, which is asking each person and involving them, and particularly the basic scientists and the lay persons, I will add that here as well, to ask them, what do you think about this? And what are your thoughts about this? And when they know they're being asked in turns, they will do their homework and come. They'll prepare and come. Agreed, all ethics committee members are busy people, but if the procedure is there, they will certainly participate actively. So I'll stop here. There are other issues which we could take up later on.
Thank you so much. See, being a clinical pharmacologist, you are a preferred basic scientist, because you are, although as a pharmacology basic scientist, clinical pharmacology, you are like a clinician also. But the main question is that those who are non-pharmacologists, the other basic scientists, when they are a member of ethics committee, how do they perceive themselves as contributing to this? And of course, here that everybody has to be involved. And then when we are conducting ethics committee meetings, we see that each member speaks, and that's why we have the reviewer mechanism, primary reviewer, secondary reviewer. You give the response to individual to present the project. And here it has to be both scientists, non-scientists, basic scientists, everybody has to present. And in that case, they will also read and go through that and to make the presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that was the main thing about the role of non-medical scientists. And somebody has asked a question that if you are a lab scientist, okay, and you are a member of an ethics committee, where you are directly not dealing with the human participants at all. You are totally a lab scientist, and you are becoming member of an ethics committee. Is it necessary for you to go through all this training? Are you supposed to read everything? Or why are you there in the committee as a basic scientist?
Right, absolutely. I think there is no excuse for not learning at least the minimum requirement in research methods, in principles of ethics, and a little bit about law and social sciences as well. And the ICMR book is really wonderful. I mean, the 2017 book that was brought up, which has all these and also references that have been given for additional reading. These are wonderful. So it is important even for a person who is predominantly in the lab. Now, there can be a challenge sometimes when a person is non-medical. They have done MSc, PhD, and then they are there as a basic scientist, and particularly if they are not in pharmacology, then all these new drugs that come up, it becomes a bit of a problem. So again, for you to take a decision about scientific validity as well as core ethics, pick up a phone and talk to people. Of course, keep confidentiality in mind, pick up the phone, talk to people, talk to, and maybe if you're concerned, as I said earlier, concerned about, confidentiality, which we must be, talk to the other ethics members itself. And after some time, of course, with virtual meetings is a challenge, but otherwise we become good friends, amongst each other, and we call each other up for help as well. Sometimes, I've had people from one corner of the city, calling and asking, can you help with this patient in, your hospital, etc. So we become friends. So we can call and ask them, and people certainly will be forthcoming to help with this support.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis. Basically, what you are telling is all the members have equal responsibility in the committee, and everybody has to learn. Everybody has to understand. It's the response of other members to see that the fellow members are understanding and they are more comfortable in the committee. Okay, thank you so much. We now move on to Dr. Shalini Bharat. Dr. Shalini? Yeah, so yes. You are also, yes, once you tell your experience, then I'll put the questions to you.
Okay, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you so much for organizing this event and for including me in it. As a social scientist, I think there are so many challenges we face, especially if it is a very multidisciplinary kind of ethics committee, which all committees are supposed to be. But when I have been, working as a EC member in our own IRB, which is, which has more of social scientists, and of course there are clinical specialists as well as legal persons and lay persons, etc. So it is not so much of a problem, but with other ethics committees, there are sometimes huge challenges. So I'll begin with, first of all, that, I would say that social scientists are also scientists. So when the dichotomy is made between scientists and non-scientists, and then social scientists are also clubbed in, into that non-scientists, then there is a bit of a issue here, because I feel that there are medical scientists, then there are non-medical scientists, perhaps you can say. But social scientists are also scientists, and they are also technical people in a way.
Yeah, you are correct, Dr. Shalini. Social scientists don't come under non-scientists. That's why we have scientists, non-scientists, medical, non-medical.
Yeah,
so generally,
this is a,
I know it's a common way of telling, but we don't say social scientists are non-medical scientists.
No, I'm talking about our, the challenges I have faced sometimes being a EC member in other, ethical committees. And so that is one of the things. But coming more to the substantial part, I find that a big challenge that as social scientists we face is that there is a bit of a challenge in getting appreciation for social science research and its methodologies, especially when it comes to qualitative research. So there is very little appreciation for a very truly exploratory research, which has its own challenges of small samples, not having statistical methods for analysis. And the non-social scientists will keep on asking, but how will you generalize? How will you, find out, what is really working, and how do you justify having, say methods like in-depth interviews and only few sample. So those are kind of real challenges we face when we have a multidisciplinary team. The other challenge which I feel, and some of you have already, pointed out to those, is that finding this rigor of science in the research design itself. And I, as a social scientist and as a researcher, feel that, you cannot begin identifying ethical issues if the research proposal itself is weak. If it, sort of does not have the robustness of a research design, because you start from there and you start finding, okay, but it has not been designed properly. It doesn't have that balance. It needs, the objectives are not carefully crafted. There is so much of a disjunct between, what is being stated in the overall research problem and the objectives, etc. And so I think it has to start from there, because ethics also can be identified only in a, well-designed proposal. There is no point in identifying ethical issues when the research design itself is weak. So I believe that ethical, the ethics members have to also look into the scientific research design. The other issue that we find is that sometimes the participants' information sheet is so crafted, it's so lengthy, and you know, you wonder whether it is to protect the participant more, or to protect the researchers and the research organization. And I feel that, you know, there is a need to have some kind of standardization about the participant information sheet, the informed consent sheet, because as social scientists, we feel that there is so much emphasis being given to, you know, what would be the way in which you would not get into a legal hassle, which I understand has to be there, but nobody is looking at the really protecting the participant and looking at what are the harms that may come to the participant. I also feel that, you know, very often when, as social scientists, you raise certain issues, then the social scientists are seen as the obstructionists. You know, you are denying the opportunity to do this research, and that you are raising issues which are so much just in the social realm. And then that is where, you know, you start wondering how to resolve this problem. So these are some of the challenges, and I feel that one way to resolve this is to really have, you know, the research or the whole exercise of looking at ethical issues in a very social and contemporary context. If you don't look at that, I think it is in a bit of a, you know, a contextual way, it makes it very difficult. And one of the ways in which we try and resolve these issues is to look at what is really the contemporary knowledge. For example, as you know, in the COVID times, we are talking about research, and we have done so many, you know, modifications to the way we will collect our data, the way we will, you know, use mobile technology. But if we are not sensitive to the fact that, you know, mobile technologies are so, the ownership is so male dominated, that if you are doing research with women, or if you're doing research with, you know, adolescent girls or young people, you probably will have, you know, issues of generalizability on whom you are doing that research. So I'm not saying that we therefore don't do the research, but to be mindful of that as the context. Yes, we have started doing research more and more on using mobile technology, but the context to be remembered is that in India, ownership of mobile phones, devices, etc., is a little unbalanced, you know, when it comes to gender, and when it comes to class, rural, urban divide, and so on. And that is the kind of, you know, context that one has to keep in mind when we are doing. But when you, as a social scientist, are talking about this, then that has to be respected and that has to be understood. But via media has to be found for it. I'm not saying that we have to bring that as a roadblock for research. So I'll stop for the moment here.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. So that leads us to the question. If it is a biomedical research proposal is coming to a committee where you are a member as a social scientist, what are the social issues which you look into that proposal to see yes, it is socially, from the social perspective, it's acceptable?
One of the things which I think all of us look at, and as a social scientist, I would look at, is what is the rationale for doing this research, and who are the you know, participants who would be you know, called to participate, and whether there are any participants who might be you know, required, but perhaps be harmed more than others. For example, you know, are pregnant women being, you know, made part of this? Or if there is a research involving people from the particular tribal community, is this really required to be done? Or whether there is a, and sometimes, you know, it is so urban centric, it is so, you know, only on certain social categories that you wonder whether this will apply to all. So then you have to bring in, you know, the whole heterogeneity and the character of our society into picture, and then ask why some categories would be excluded and why only certain categories will be included. So I think as a social scientist, one of the issues would be, you know, what is the rationale, and what is the rationale for including some and not others, or you know, excluding particular communities from a particular research. So those would be some, of course, one will have to then go through the entire process.
Then the social value of the study, ultimately, how does it going to benefit
Yes,
the society.
Really, yeah, and sometimes, just to say that we did it in, one part of the country, now we will do it in another part of the country. But, is it really, so what is really the strongest rationale that you are proposing? Because especially when it is invasive procedures, and sometimes it is also another challenge that, it is commonly felt that only invasive procedures will have adverse impact or adverse, effect. But actually certain type of questions can also have adverse impact. You ask a person, how did you deal with the COVID, impact when your spouse, passed away? So you are, sometimes the person is revisiting a, event, is, has painful memories. And we feel that, oh, this question is quite okay, but the manner in which it is being asked, will it, bring any harm to the person? So those are some of the issues, but these become when you go into, more details of the proposal itself, but they do become important. To look at the mental health dimensions, to look at the social dimensions of a particular study is very important. Are you going to bring, unnecessary attention on a particular group of people if you arrive at their doorstep to do certain research, and how do you deal with it? Now, this could be seen as, but how else do we do research? Yeah, but, somebody has to ask that question, and then for you to, understand and see, okay, what are the other ways in which we can do it? So as somebody had said that, we then get to be seen as people who are being difficult, and social scientists more often, along with maybe legal experts or others, are seen as being a little more difficult than others. But I think these are only for, all of us to, advance knowledge, but in a more, in the most ethical and, humane manner. That is the, I think, common objective for all of us.
Okay, thank you. As you yourself said about the people don't understand the qualitative research, one of the question is that, when you look at the social perspective, are there any difference between when you approve quantitative research and qualitative research? How do you look at them differently? Because yes, you also rightly pointed that people don't understand. But nowadays we have more of these proposals coming. So this is a question which some people have asked that, what is how do you look at the social perspective between the quantitative and qualitative research?
As a qualitative researcher, I'm trained as a quantitative researcher, but now doing more of qualitative research. I'm very, I should say, acutely sensitive to the fact that, one has to have a full appreciation of the nature of research design. And if it has been designed as either quantitative or qualitative, we should be careful about asking certain questions and not demanding that, you fulfill these criteria. For example, and I would say that, yes, ethical issues, so long as it is human participants research, the basic, foundational issues are common. But when it comes to a quantitative versus a qualitative research, then I think there are some fine distinctions that we have to make. For example, insisting on a theoretical framework for a qualitative research is really not required, because a qualitative research more often than not leads to theoretical formulations, leads to, certain development of certain hypotheses. So you need not have hypotheses, you need not have a theoretical framework, but it becomes very difficult to pinpoint those to, those who are trained in quantitative research. And I would also say that the mismatch that happens sometimes between, your stated objectives and the method of data collection. So you want to understand the, community's perception, or you want to understand normative behavior, say, for example, on something which is very sensitive, for example, domestic violence, people's attitude towards, domestic violence or the domestic violence bill. But the method that you want to have data collection will be in-depth interviews, case studies. Now, there is a mismatch, you are talking about community level perception, and I would say a focus group discussion would be more appropriate here. So finding these kind of, gaps in the way the study has been designed is different from how quantitative and qualitative research should be seen from an ethics angle. Also, when you are looking at some very sensitive topics or controversial topics or polarizing topics, and then to do, say that you will also do a survey and you will then do a case studies. I think ethical issues have to be asked there very carefully, because you would be looking at very sensitive topics of, say, child sexual abuse survivor or a rape survivor, domestic violence, survivor, and inappropriateness of research designs is definitely an ethical issue then.
Yeah, thank you. So a role of social scientists in a committee is very important to even educate the other members of the committee on the importance of these issues, because these are not known to people, that how do you do the assessment from the perspective of a social sciences perspective. Luckily, in the ICMR guideline 2017, that's the reason we have introduced the section on social behavioral science research also, so that people are aware of these are also as part of the thing which people have to learn. It's not just in the domain of the social scientists alone. The others also have to understand it. That's the reason we were able to introduce it. But I still feel that's one section which we need further elaboration when we do the next revision to make it more clear.
In fact, I should say, our ICMR guidelines is very balanced, and socio-behavioral aspect is sufficiently emphasized, but training is required, I would say, on appreciating the whole range of social science research methods, not just quantitative.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shalini. We now move on to Dr. Nandini Kumar. Dr. Nandini, your video on. Dr. Nandini is representing the committee today as an ethicist. Of course, Dr. Nandini will know that, ethicist is a very rare species in this country. We have very few people who are fully trained in ethics where we can say ethicist. And so today, she's one of the most trained persons in this country, so we have put her as an ethicist. But then in our guidelines, we always say when membership, ethicist, philosopher, theologian, so all are put in one basket, which is, of course, ethics is come out of philosophy. It's one of the sections of philosophy, that's okay. But still all these are put together in one, which of course, whether it is right. So it's for Dr. Nandini now to say that what do you think is the role of an ethicist in the committee? Because everybody is supposed to learn ethics. All are supposed to look into the ethics only when a proposal is coming. But what is the special role of an ethicist? And do you think that, ours putting all these into one basket is correct, and hereafter we'll have to make it as a separate entity? And then your challenge as an ethicist in the committee, you can say, then I have some more questions to you. Unmute yourself first, please. Unmute yourself. Yeah, yes.
Good day to all of you.
Yeah, now,
I thank ICMR for giving me this opportunity. And as Dr. Vasanta said, that it sounds a little strange to me when I'm addressed as an ethicist, because I seem to be a mixture. By training, of course, I qualify to be an ethicist. And in some committees, I am included as an ethicist. But being actually conversant with the guidelines as well as the current regulations related to the clinical research, I seem to be a mixture. And the challenge that I face is because of this. There are three types of experiences that I have had to face. One is because if the ethics committee members do know my expertise in the real sense, then the problem to me is that they look up to me for answer for every other problem. And, I cannot play God knowing all the answers. And there are situations where, there is nothing written in the guidelines or the regulations to guide us as to what should be done. Then, of course, we have to take a combined view of it, but it creates a lot of tension in me that I should not say something which is which may turn to be wrong. So, of course, we need a little bit of discussion outside the circle, come back again, and then debate on that. That's one experience. The second experience is that people know me not more as an ethicist, but as a person who is from ICMR. So there is actually a sort of equal partnership with other members, and whatever suggestions are given are respected. And the third one is about ignoring me totally as an ethicist. I can give an example of a very big NGO, and I was actually roped in as an ethicist because somebody in that institution knew me from another ethics committee experience.
Nandini, we lost you.
Dr. Nandini, if you can, stop your video, maybe the band will.
We can't hear you.
Nandi, can you hear us? I think we lost. Yeah. Ma'am, I think we can move on while Doctor will connect with Dr.
We lost her. We'll come back to her. Okay. We'll now move on to Dr. BT Kaul. Our legal expert in many of the committees. I had the experience of working with him for the last so many years. And your experience as a challenge as a legal member in the ethics committees, because you are a member of many ethics committees and some of the private sector also, as well as in the government sector. So your experience and the challenge, you can tell us first, and then I'll put the question.
Well, I am very grateful to the ICMR, to Dr. Vasanta, to Dr. Mr. and Mrs. Mathur for giving me this opportunity of being part of this panel. And I have many experiences to share, because when I joined as a member in an ethics committee, it was the time when there was a public interest litigation filed in the Supreme Court. And legal trials came to be stopped by the Supreme Court's order. And a committee was set up by the government, central government, and Roy Choudhury committee was constituted. And I was very fortunate, personally requested by Dr. Roy Choudhury to be part of that committee. And I had a great learning in that committee along with Dr. Vasanta, Dr. Roy Choudhury. It was a great experience for me. And we had a lot of discussions on this, why this order had come from the Supreme Court and what is the task for this committee. And in fact, we decided at the very outset, and that is very important for us to understand the whole movement that has developed in this country in these 8-9 years. And we have moved from a very difficult phase to a phase where we have taken leadership in the world to meet the COVID-19 challenge. And India has a very place of pride in the Committee of Nations in the matter of giving a vaccination, the vaccines, not one, at least 2 vaccines to the world. And we decided at that time that let us look at what has gone wrong and why the Supreme Court was so hostile to the whole thing. And Supreme Court, in fact, has had passed very adverse orders around that time. It was this committee which decided to recommend changes in the legal framework to give a regulatory system in India which is robust, which is transparent, and is built on the foundation of science and ethics. And I think I can say it with great pride that there was a sincere effort on the part of this committee, and a lot of changes came in the rules which were framed under the Drug and Cosmetics Act 1940. And the Schedule Y, there was a lot of changes which came in Schedule Y. For the first time, registration of the ethics committee came in. In fact, of course, we had asked for the accreditation of the investigators, accreditation of the ethics committees, but I think, that was a difficult thing. We had talked about video conferencing, audio, video, visuals of informed consent of all, but then we decided, of the vulnerable groups. But anyway, that was beside the point. But 2-3 things that I just wanted to say very quickly was to give a robust legal system. and to balance the science, advancement of science, because we need technology to develop, we need the new drugs to come in, because we must have accessibility to the new drugs. We must have affordable, we must have what we call as affordable, accessible, and safe drugs available. And in fact, if you see the drugs definition in the Act, it brings in devices as well as the drugs. But then we have two different rules. Now we have different rules for the devices. We have now different rules for the drugs, new drugs, in fact, with what we call as new drugs. And I think I looked at the legal regime, whole of it, you can see we have the constitutional guarantees, fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, and right to health is one of the basic rights which has been read by the Supreme Court in Article 21. And then we have also fundamental duties to develop a scientific temperament. You know, scientific temperament, all of us have to develop, is a fundamental duty that all of us carry. And how do we see the march of the law in this direction? And what is the role of legal expert in the ethics committee? I found my experience was two important things that I could see in these 2 years, to these 10 years of my association was causality was a very important aspect. When we talked about, compensation aspect, most of the times, we as lawyers, as a layperson, as social scientists would not agree with the doctors, principal investigator, would not agree with the sponsor about whether it was connected or it was not connected. Then question of management of the SAEs, management of adverse events became a very important aspect. And then Roy Chaudhary committee gave a very important dimension to this problem, because we said once a serious adverse event happens, the management of that should be taken by the sponsor and the principal investigator. And compensation, I was a member of the committee, YK Gupta committee, which gave the formula. And that formula, it was a wonderful experience to work on that committee also, because we gave minimum 8 lakh rupees in the case of a death, wherever death took place because of a factor which was connected with the clinical trial. That very important issues, I think, that as a law expert has to see is examining the contract of the sponsor with the other stakeholders. And one of the most important things that we have to see is whether there is a provision of insurance, whether there is a corpus bill to deal with compensation if it is payable to the participants. We have also to see whether there is serious adverse event which takes place, and that management of the serious adverse event is taken care of. Now, that every document that is part of the whole clinical trial process has to be assessed, examined, and it has to be vetted by the legal expert. It must pass through the legal expert. And I think in ICMR itself, in the 1 or 2 meetings, we definitely went to the sponsors and we said, you have to make available these documents to us, because we want to see whether the insurance document is adequately providing for compensation or not. And then after that, I think we again also are very importantly concerned with the informed consent. How well is the informed consent document in simple words explaining voluntariness, explaining transparency, maintaining confidentiality, maintaining privacy, and all those aspects are very important aspects which a legal expert definitely has to apply his mind, and whether the translation in the language understood by the participant, and especially when we are dealing with the vulnerable sections of the participants, whether they are witnessed or they are not witnessed, all those things have to be definitely taken into account. Monitoring of compliance is very important duty, I think, which a legal expert in the ethics committee has to ensure. And then examination of the composition of the ECs, compliance reports, fulfillment of the rules and responsibilities of the members, developing of repositories. Now, all these aspects, whether if we have a robust legal mechanism. We have to ensure that there are compliances, there is a follow-up, there is a implementation of those rules. Otherwise, those rules will not mean anything if they are not complied with. Analyzing and forwarding of the reports to the DCGI. Now, all those aspects, I think, are very important challenges which have to be taken into account when we are dealing with the role of a legal expert in a trial. And legal expert definitely has to participate vigorously into the debates and see the balancing of the rights, human rights of the participants, and also advancement of the science. And social context has to be definitely taken into account, and the rights of the participants have definitely a very important aspect of the role that a lawyer has to do. And these are some of the challenges that we find need to be dealt with by the legal experts when they are part of an ethics committee. And he has a very important role, because no ethics committee meeting can take place without a legal expert being present. And that is a very important role that is given to a legal expert in an ethics committee. That's what I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaul, for bringing the Ranjit Raj Chaudhary committee report into the knowledge of everybody. I think that is one committee where we can say very proudly that all the 25 recommendations of the committee were totally accepted by the Ministry of Health. They didn't raise objection to even one recommendation. All the 25 were accepted by the Ministry of Health, and majority are now implemented also. That's one of the things which happened with that committee, and we are very happy to be together in that committee and with Dr. Roy Chaudhary. Now, as a legal member of the ethics committee, of course, I've seen you very active in our committees where you are a member, including our Central Ethics Committee. But generally, the question is that in most of the ethics committees, not many, I can say most of the ethics committees, the legal member of the committee is there to complete the quorum for that day's proceedings. They hardly participate in the discussions, and they just see in case there is an agreement, they look at it. Otherwise, they don't look into any other issues. Of course, you have very beautifully explained what all the lawyers should do. But do you think, what should they actually learn to be as a part of the member? And do you think we need actually separate training for all the legal members of ethics committees?
I think legal members also, along with other members, should get the training on legal framework. What is the regulatory mechanism provided? Like, suppose I would certainly like people to be first told what are the constitutional provisions and judicial decisions which give so much emphasis upon the right to life and right to medical treatment and scientific advancements that need to be brought into the practice. And then they need to be told, like, suppose people still talk about Schedule Y, but I think the Drug and Clinical Trial Rules 2019 do away with Schedule Y.
Yes.
This is not known to many of the people. I really feel very bad, because this is something which has happened. We have a complete code now on clinical trials on human beings. And that code has many changes that you will find that have come in. So therefore, we need to have a program where we will tell people about the Medical Device Rules 2017, very beautifully drawn. And, we make a distinction now between, though I said drug includes both in the definition of the act, but when we go to the rules, we have separate rules on devices, we have separate rules on new drugs and investigative drugs. All those are very important things that should be brought, and these training programs must be there. And then we should also be able to bring in international perspective of the human rights law. Because what is important is that at the international level, we're talking about globally now, development of the human rights regime, and then correlationship with the domestic law, and that interrelationship, because when we talk about today, we are having all things on electronic media, and therefore we can have these programs across the world. And then we must be able to know the developments that are taking place across the board, across the boundaries. And therefore, we should be able to train our legal experts. And they should also work very hard, because I think Dr. Vasanta will remember, I told Dr. Raj Chaudhary, sir, please give me an opportunity to write independently on compensation. And I wrote that chapter, completely independently on compensation. But I had to work very hard on that. So that is the kind of a hard work that should go in, commitment that should be. It's not that you have to be a part of the ethics committee and then do nothing. I think one has to evolve, one has to progress, and it is a dynamic process because law is changing every day. That's like, I think one of the speakers said that even ethics is changing every day. So therefore, when the law and ethics are changing, therefore you have also to change. And that is, I think, the only mantra to develop yourself.
We need a specialized training for the legal members of the committees also. It's as an ethics committee, they have to understand the different perspectives which they have to know. It's not just look at one agreement. There are many more things which is there legally they have to look into. There is a question that, if there is a case, if a patient or a participant goes to the court, what is the liability of the ethics committee? Are all the members liable, or is it only the institution is liable, or all the members are also liable? What is the liability?
In fact, I have this very important. This is a very important issue because at one point of time, ethics committee were feeling, and they were always apprehensive of the fact that because of the attitude of the judiciary, maybe that at some point of time, ethics committee themselves may be made liable in the courts. So therefore, I thought that it was necessary for the institutions to ensure the members of the ethics committee also. So, but if we are able to build up a good image, like in US, effort has been to protect the ethics committee members, ethics committees, because they're trying to build up a robust protection in favor of the ethics committees. I think ethics committees have to work honestly, diligently, and bona fidely, and we have to give an image so that it does not ultimately result into the liability of the ethics committee. Till today, not, but I do not know. I don't have a yes or no answer for tomorrow.
I think even in India, there are some ethics committees which demand insurance
yes,
for
that
the
is what
ethics
I said.
committee members. Yes, even it's happening in India also.
Yes, yes.
Yes, that they have to protect it. But then, of course, if something goes wrong, everybody will be liable to answer. The other question which is asked is about the informed consent. The informed consent document, is it a contractual document? Is it a legal document, or it's simply an agreement?
The very important thing about this informed consent document is that the participant can at any time withdraw from the trial, and there is no liability fastened to the person. Therefore, to that extent, it is not legally enforceable because there is no consideration. Because informed consent is only one of the elements of an contract. It is only dealing with the consent part of it, but it does not deal with, because there are 6 elements of a contract. One is intention to enter into a contract, promise, consideration, free will, capacity to enter into a contract, and the object of the contract. When we deal with informed consent, we talk only one element of a contract, not all elements of the contract.
Thank you, Dr. Kaul. I think all of us need a training from you on the various legal aspects, because even many of the legal members of the committees are simply not aware of the totality of their responsibilities. And many times I see that they just attend for a short time and then go away. I think it's needed.
We should work on it.
Because the multiple facets of law, which is not just looking into agreement, there are other things also have to be seen by them. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interventions. We'll now move on to Dr. Nandini again. Dr. Nandini, you are connected now? Yes. Please unmute yourself. Unmute, yeah. Now, please continue what you are telling, your challenges. Yes.
Yeah, sorry for that inadvertent interruption. Okay, so in that particular ethics committee, I saw that people were just ignoring ethics. Anything I say about ethics, it was like, oh, she's opened her mouth. Trying to, go sideways, then talk more about the scientific aspects. They had wonderful scientific discussion, and mostly some of them were on social aspects. It was, in fact, very wonderful to hear them talk about it. But when I tried to raise 1 or 2 questions about the informed consent document, this. Yes, I think you will take care of that. No, they'll tell the investigator. And there's no member secretary sitting there. Each investigator is noting down the minutes. So I objected to this once and said that I would like to resign. They did not pay attention to that. Then again, the same thing was happening. And of course, one or two members who were discussing the science of it did, get alerted. And then they said, I think we should have a session with her about the human protection part of it. So that means they were not at all sensitized about it. And then again, the same story. And then finally I said that, okay, I'm resigning from that. So there are actually ethics committees. I must say the institutions which are not interested in actually the ethics review part of it. They just want an approval because it is a requirement on the paper. So that was one of my, and then another development as a chairperson. Because of my background, I insisted that it should go stepwise. And it was a new committee actually. So we went through the sensitization program, we went through the SOP, and then the SOP was being revised and it was full of mistakes, literary mistakes as well as some other points. So correcting that was taking a lot of time with my tight schedule at that time. And finally, the member secretary wrote to me in a very curt manner saying that since we have many pending urgent proposals to be approved, and you don't seem to have the time, so we have appointed another chairperson. So I was summarily dismissed. And I'm happy that it was done so, because I wouldn't have liked to be a part of such an ethics committee. So those were my...
The role of ethics in the project review is something which many people still have not understood, in spite of all our registration mechanism, accreditation going on in the country in some institutions. Still, people have not realized the importance of ethics review. They are only thinking of scientific review. So this constant debate between scientific review and ethical review goes on, but still people give more importance to scientific review. Now the question to you as an ethicist, Dr. Nandini, is that how do you actually do the benefit risk assessment? It's very easy to say in every proposal we have to do risk benefit assessment. The question is that from the ethics perspective, actually how do you do it? Can we do it for every project? How do you do it?
In fact, it is common for all the projects. One has to see what is the level of risk, and that is described in the ICMR guidelines. Many a times I have to tell people that please read that for more details. There would be a little bit of discussion on table, but if you want to know more about it, please go through the guidelines. That's one advice. In some ethics committees, they do have the classification given in the submission form itself. And many times we see that the investigators themselves don't know. They ask for exemption without, the proposal actually deserving that sort of categorization. And we have to literally teach them on the table that why it cannot be done so and all that. So the risk element is something which people have to give more attention to. And based on that, you actually put the benefits on the other side and see whether it is worthwhile to proceed with that project or not. So that's how we see that. And it is, of course, it's common for all the proposals, I must say. And as actually Shalini Bharat had described, when it comes to social science research, one has to be very, very careful about the sensitivities. And also there would be a danger to the researcher herself or himself if we don't see whether their protection is also taken into account. And some passage about this is given in the ICMR guidelines also.
So basically, I think everybody has to understand the participant that risk benefit assessment is something which is not done by the ethics committee members only. It starts from the researchers. They have to look into their own proposal and see that what is the risk benefit component. Is there any risk, and how do they handle the risk? And so they do that, and then of course the ethics committee members will do that. There's another question which is asked is that nowadays we are talking of randomized trials, blinded trials, placebo in the control arm, and all those things. From the ethics perspective, do you think it is right to do blinded trials and right to use placebo? Although internationally it is said that, of course, placebo should not be used anymore, but still most of the trials which are happening, we do have a placebo arm. How ethical it is?
Yeah, this was the bone of contention for quite some time. And the Helsinki Declaration was toying with that. And finally, they came out with the directions saying that you can use placebo provided there has been no treatment at all in that particular disease. So you are actually justified in using placebo. But then, ethics committees would like to have pilot studies first, just as a safeguard. But of course, US FDA goes in a big way with placebo arm. They approve such proposals. So placebo can be allowed in certain circumstances, and especially in self-limited diseases, you could have an arm with placebo. But then you have to define that whether these diseases are self-limited ones or not. The other aspect is about the methodology, double blinding. They say that RCT, double blind, will be the best to do, but in certain projects, this may not be possible at all. So you have to actually see that on case-to-case basis.
Okay, thank you. And then it brings me to the first question. Do you think, are we right in putting ethicist, philosopher, theologian all in one group, or we should insist on a separate ethicist in every committee?
Actually, the point is about, the morality, the doing the right and the wrong, which is a part and parcel of the teaching in philosophy, theology, and even the ethicists are day in and day out binned with these principles. So that way, if you take the teaching, that would be common to all these three disciplines. So they can be grouped into one to look at the ethics part of the thing. Only thing is, when you have religious people, you have to be careful because they can go to extremes, whichever religion. So you have to choose a person who has a fair balance in opinioning about issues.
Okay, this brings one question, which of course I kept it for Dr. Shalini, but then I can ask you that. In a committee, since you have taken this issue of theologians or anybody is taking a strong view about a particular point, if the other members may not agree, you go by the majority decision in a committee, the consensus. So if somebody has a very strong opinion, from their point it is correct, but the others go by a majority decision and take a decision on a project, are we ethically right in doing that?
So unless there are strong objections, I think broad consensus is fine. But whenever there's a very strong, opinion, of course, we always say that it has to be minuted also. But as Urmila was highlighting, that it could be quite problematic in certain circumstances, then how do you go about it? Then you may have to resort to voting. Recently, somebody was telling me about their experience that, the voting actually fell on the wrong side because ethically, the members who were in that committee who had opinionated the right decision about the ethics of that particular project were smaller in number compared to the others, because the others were actually influenced by trying to help the investigators. So you see,
so that's a question that if you go by the majority, it may not be always right.
Yes.
Yeah.
It could be.
Yeah, that is one. Okay, thank you, Dr. Nandini. We now move on to Ms. Harmala Gupta. Madam, Dr. Harmala Gupta, thank you so much for attending this. I've listened to you many times, and your experience is wonderful for everybody to understand. Of course, as a non-medical or a non-technical member of a committee, and as a patient representative, you can first give me your experience and the challenge which you have faced. And then, of course, I'll put the questions to you, which is questions which are raised by some of the lay members of the committee. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Vasanta. It's really an honor to be here, and I thank Dr. Roli Mathur for her kind invitation. And Dr. Naresh Gupta, I hope next time we can both walk together. I look forward to that. Yes, I have been on a couple of ethics committees, and I've always felt as if I was there because they needed someone who was a layperson, and that I didn't really have any sort of role to play beyond that. And that's unfortunate, I think, because I think that we need to think about why we do this research. What is the purpose of the research? And after all, it is to advance medical science, scientific knowledge, and it's really for the human being who is at the center of it. And for me, really, ethics is about empathy, being able to put yourself in another person's shoes. It's about the other. You can take a moral position, but that's your personal position. But when you are doing research or anything else, it has to be a position where you are able to see the other point of view. And it's unfortunate that sometimes the other point of view is seen as an antagonistic point of view. I think we have to realize that everyone around that table has something to contribute. So it's also to a large extent about the assumptions we make. And that's unfortunate. We assume that if someone is coming to represent patients, they are necessarily going to be difficult, or vice versa, which is not the idea at all. The idea is really to come at a consensus, which is in the best interest of the research and also in ethical terms, because I really do believe the best science is ethical science. Really, it's impossible to separate the two. So it's not as if, okay, I'm representing science and you're representing ethics. And now we have to find some meeting point between the two. I don't think it's like that at all. And the challenge is the fact that you're not a so-called expert, and therefore getting people to see that nevertheless you may be of value. And secondly, I find often in ethics committees, there are people in the scientific or medical world who already know each other, have worked together. There's a kind of collegium there. And you immediately walk into this and you're the outsider. And how do you break into this? You know, so I think, again, that the need to make people feel that they're included is very important. And certainly there's an asymmetry of knowledge. You can't wish that away. I would not have the knowledge level of the person, of the researcher or the scientist. However, as was suggested, if you have a simple one-pager where you can put it down simply, because I think if you can do that, you really know what you're doing. You know, why are you doing this research? With what purpose? Where do you have, what do you hope to do? Who is it going to involve? You know, I think this makes it much simpler. So again, it's about easy communication. And if I am given that, even prior to the meeting, I think I come prepared. And that to some extent takes care of this asymmetry. So I think that this is what I would argue for, that I think the patient voice is an important voice. After all, I heard a young British girl say the other day, paraplegic, she said, nothing about us without us. And I think that is very important. You know, it's also ethics. And there again, in our country, I know I work in the field of cancer, there are so many issues. People are not told their diagnosis. They're not told their prognosis. And you have such a person as part of your research study. You know, if they how do you take informed consent? You know, and a big issue also, who takes the informed consent? Then I'm afraid it will be very difficult for the patient to say no. And so I think even the person who is taking that consent is very crucial, because there is perhaps not really, done purposely, but there is a pressure there. There's an asymmetry anyway in that relationship. And when it comes to women, I think, when it comes to gender, this is especially important. Women have to be encouraged to take their own decisions independently. They're not used to it, I agree. It's uncomfortable if you haven't done it. But I think the ethical need is really to help that person, to give them whatever material they need to be able to take that decision about their life. Because talking about experts, as someone said, I am the expert of my life. And I think when we talk about lay and expert, it's sometimes an artificial division. Each one of us is an expert of our lives and have something to contribute and need to be heard. And I think that, half our problems would be over even in the ethics committee if we listen to each other. And I think it would be really great if we had joint trainings. We all trained together so that it was clear that, it's not like you need the training because you're deficient in some way. I don't. No. We all need the training in some sphere or the other to be able to do this in the best possible manner. It is really building that team. It's an effort. We've heard from people who chair meetings, not easy. There are always dominant people, for sure. But I think if each one of us focuses on the need and why we are there, and what we want to do, because I don't think we are bad people or good people. That's not the issue. The point is, how can we do this in the best possible way? And certainly for patient advocates, another issue, Dr. Vasantha, for us is, who is financing the research? Who is financing the clinical trial? There's so much talk now about how pharmaceutical companies, drug companies are putting pressure, and how these clinical trials are being moved from the developed world, as it were, to the less developed world, where they feel they will be able to get more participants. Perhaps even there's an advantage in having less informed participants, which is why the role of the layperson, I think, is becoming so crucial now. And to not emphasize that and to some way see the layperson as someone we have to have, what can we do, is not in anyone's interest. Because, and so I think for all these reasons, I would really argue that we should not see this in a hierarchical manner. I think everyone has something to offer. We must be given that respect. We've heard the word today, respect, a very important word, I think, along with empathy. Respect for the people who are going to sign that form as well. So I think if we have that right attitude, we just can't go wrong. I don't see how we can.
You're absolutely correct. I don't think anybody has any other opinion. Everybody will agree with you. That's what, as I said in the beginning, every member of an ethics committee has to be trained as an EC member. Nobody is an expert here. You may be expert in something else, but as an EC member, your responsibilities, what you are supposed to do, how are you going to protect the participant at the end of the day is what is your role as an EC member. And all the EC members have equal responsibility. Nobody has more, nobody has less. All are equally important. But the question to you, Dr. Gupta, is that, of course, you have been now experienced, you've been in a number of committees. People listen to you now, okay? You are heard. But in most of the committees, the lay members are mute participants in the committee. They don't speak. One is they're scared of speaking. Sometimes they may not be, nobody explains to them to that level that they can understand. And they're afraid that whatever they say will be ridiculed, they may not be heard, and so they don't even speak. So majority of the committees, they become a mute participant, as you rightly said, as to they have to complete their formality of having a member there. They don't really contribute. So what would you say that if they have to give us that equal contribution, which is expected, that's what we expect, that they will give equal contribution and feel that they are equal to everybody else. And in fact, I always said that they are the more important people than the scientists are there to defend science. But what here the ethics committees is to protect the human participants. The safety, welfare of the participant is what the committee is looking into more than the science, that science is there to help them. So if that is the case, and they are the much more important, that they do understand that the word is heard. So what would you suggest to make them more active members in many committees, which is not happening actually in reality?
I think the committees have to be more welcoming to the layperson, build their confidence, let them know that their opinion does matter. And one way that was suggested was perhaps getting everyone to give their point of view, therefore making sure that the layperson too is able to talk. And I think to make them understand that this is a learning process for everyone, and that any question they ask, any misgiving they have is not too small or too stupid. Everything that anyone has in their mind is important, and we'd like to hear it. So I think it's about building up that confidence and giving them opportunities to participate, and making it very clear that their role is a very important role. Many of us don't understand our roles either, and I think if we can be made to understand our role and how it can impact and affect people, I think we will start taking ourselves more seriously perhaps as well, and come there with this intention of the need to also speak and make a difference, because it counts,
It's the responsibility of the other members to make the laypersons feel that their their importance and their value in the committee. So I think everybody has a shared responsibility. And here one more question to you is that in your experience, whatever you have suggested, made changes to be made in the informed consent, do people listen to you and make changes, or it's very difficult for you to convince them, the researchers or the others, that what changes you want are actually essential to be made?
Well, there have been occasions when, yes, some changes that I've suggested have been made. But on the whole, I think it's still a very intimidating document for most people in a country where people can't even read and write necessarily. And therefore, I think that, I always worry that perhaps we are introducing a kind of bias in our selection of subjects too, because of the kind of emphasis on that written consent form that we have. And so I think we have to be open to even, people getting their consent on videos or whatever. And so I think that those are all areas that we need to explore, because often we tend to pattern ourselves on what the Western world is doing. And our needs are different. Culturally, we are different. As I told you, where we don't even tell a patient the diagnosis because the family says, no, don't tell. There's a conspiracy of silence. How is that person going to give their consent? And so these are very important issues that we all need to think about. This whole question of, I mentioned the word respect, empathy, and I would add a third, honesty. After all, any sort of relationship or anything is built on honesty. Yeah. And how honest should we be in terms of the information we also give to people, and to inform people at any time you can back out. You're not committed here. Secondly, often people feel, oh my God, I'm being offered a new treatment and I'm going to be well now. Certainly for cancer. Most of these treatments are for metastasized cancer, people very seriously sick. It's not going to be a miracle for them. At the most, the study is seeing whether we can extend life by a few days. And I think that those expectations also need to be dealt with in a gentle but honest way. So I think for all these reasons, we have to have good communicators. I think communication is of the essence. we have to listen to people. We have to factor in what their fears may be, what their situation, real life situation is, and try to respond to that in some way. So I think that if that person knows you care for them, anyone who knows you care for them, I think you can get that informed consent from them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, for sharing your experiences. Thank you so much. We now move on to Dr. Prashant Mathur, as the head of the institution. Dr. Mathur?
Ma'am. Hello.
Is he there? Dr. Prashant, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yes, Dr. Prashant. Yeah, now you, of course, as a head of the institution, what do you think is the challenge for you to have a good performing ethics committee in your institution?
Yeah, I think it's a very important issue and needs a considerable amount of attention. And you have to be, blessed to be having a well-functioning ethics committee. And most of this comes out from a good planning for an ethics committee in terms of setting up of members, running the review processes, interacting with the members, their trainings, the kind of difficulties they face, interacting with the researchers who submit proposals to the ethics committees, keeping this environment transparent and accountable. And I think trying to maintain a comfortable distance from the functioning of the ethics committee so that you are not too close to be interfering, but not too far away also from not being able to see, listen, and feel what is going on. Because as head of institution, the purpose of a ethics committee is to serve and encourage the research which the institution is proposing. In my case, because our 100% job is research, we have nothing else to do. Compared to, let's say, a medical college, which also has a job of, people have job of treating patients or teaching, classes are there, undergraduate, postgraduates. But here it is full-time research. We have nothing else to do. So this is our main business. To how to keep that tempo up is also a role of a head of institution. We will have to ward off and protect our autonomy as ethics committee, as institutions, from pressures if they come. And how do you deal with those pressures, and rather taking steps not to compromise the quality of ethics reviews. And this COVID pandemic has taught us many lessons on how well one can run an ethics committee. Challenges of providing adequate infrastructure is there, providing staff, funds, and now even the ethics committees or institutions may be challenged by providing, seamless online facilities of web conferencing. That itself is a technology challenge. And unless this is not taken up by the institution, the functioning gets jeopardized. Ethics Secretariat would require space which is dedicated to keep their their records safely. They will require dedicated kind of, even small things like printers, scanners, also maybe separate internet connections and web logins, so that they can maintain privacy and confidentiality also. Even things like shredders, they may be very small items, but these are very important from a privacy confidentiality purpose. Yeah. There will be conflicts of interest, which will be minor, major. So one has to learn how to handle those conflicts of interest. But if a priori some of them are known, then they can be avoided at the beginning itself. But this assessment about conflict of interest must be a constant endeavor, so that so a lot of preventive steps can be taken to avoid major conflicts. Sometimes as heads, we are answerable to superior officers, superior offices, superior systems than us. So we will have to respond on behalf of the ethics committee, or a decision taken by some ethics committees, or results of the study itself, which may pose an ethical issue. And we have had in ICMR some examples where the head of institutions have been hauled up and have been made answerable. But if the system is transparent, it has well documentation of procedures and processes, the minutes are in place, and now with the Right to Information Act also in place, one can prevent a lot of things. And this prevention could be primary or it could be secondary. The moment you something comes to your notice, you should be able to take a decision along with the ethics committee members, so that to see that it doesn't aggravate or accelerate, or is not scaled up.
Okay.
Seeking cooperation of all ethics committee members is also a challenging task due to their various compulsions of time, interests, and that engagement should be a constant. So at some periodicity, heads of institutions should talk or interact with the ethics committee members, not in terms of specific projects, but in terms of overall performance. Periodic updation of the institute and its research activities also forms an important aspect. NCDIR research is very peculiar because we run large multicentric studies and registries, which many members are not familiar with. And every registry is treated like a clinical trial or something else. But there is a difference between, so that clarity has to be provided maybe from time to time. And I even foresee members of ethics, as I heard some members previously, even members should be educating the committee about their own speciality from which they come. So as we are hearing today, the layman's, the patient's perspective, the social science perspective, the legal perspective, even they can be resource people. So organizing all of these things in a timely manner will be very crucial for a successful running of the ethics committees. And to having standard operating procedures in place, which are revised from time to time, which are dynamic, which are contextual to the local, to the national, or even international. And we have to be sensitive to international collaborative research also. And these kind of things need to be taken care of. So this is what comes to the top of my mind.
Okay.
And,
thank you, Dr. Prashant. One question to you is that, in ICMR guideline we have given, protected time should be given to the member secretaries for effective functioning of ethics committees. And many member secretaries say that, we are not given any extra benefit for being member secretary. We are overburdened with our work, and it's an additional responsibility for us without any other convenience given to us. So although we have put it in the guidelines, the protected time to the member secretary, what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, I think that needs to be provided. And, unfortunately, not only in ICMR setups, even in medical colleges or institutions or universities, the kind of career progression assessment which is made, and because member secretaries are also part of the scientific community, so it's by rotation, a deputation, okay, somebody becomes a member secretary. The career progression assessments happen generally around your scientific achievements, and ethics committee running is seen like an administrative task. So in a medical college, somebody can be in charge of stores, somebody can be a faculty member, can be in charge of laundry or sterilization department and all that kind of thing. but that doesn't build into the career progression assessments of how well you performed. So similar thing I see happens with the ethics committee member secretary. This needs to be addressed at much larger policy levels, because it is providing protected time means you must have adequate or surplus, human resources. So while the person is on a tenure of 2 to 3 years of as member secretary, the other task which that person is supposed to do is being dealt by somebody else. Very few fortunate institutions will have that kind of a provision. The other way to bend around that is to hire more people in contractual mode who will provide that necessary support to the member secretary so as to function, so that this member secretary doesn't need to be running around for all documentation purposes, and one can focus. So this is still an evolving requirement, but it's very sensitive requirement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prashant. We now move on to Dr. Banu Rekha. Okay, Dr. Banu Rekha, yes, you are there. So we have been hearing about all the members of the ethics committees, and you have been a very efficient member secretary for many years, and you have been a very active researcher also. Now today you are representing the researcher community in front of the ethics committee. So, I mean, what do you think is your experience? You tell the challenges which you had as a researcher to be submitting proposals and to it's satisfying the requirements of an ethics committee. Since you are on both sides, of course, you know the difficulties of both the sides. So here you tell me, as a researcher, what was your challenge which you faced?
So thank you, ma'am, and distinguished panelists and the overwhelming participants. I thank the organizers for the given opportunity. So a researcher, basically before becoming a member secretary of the ethics committee, I used to dread actually ethics committee as a researcher alone, because there were so many things that goes on in one's mind before submitting a research proposal to the ethics committee. And after becoming a member secretary, when I interact with researchers, there are so many questions from their end, and before submitting the proposal for research and during the ethics review. So some of the things that the researchers' concerns are there before going to the ethics committee is, does this require an ethics review or not? So is this clinical research, does this proposal need to go at all for a research committee approval or review? So that is one thing. And then the type of review that it has to go. So whether it has to go for an exempt review, expedited review, or full board review. So those kind of basic questions go over in their mind, and they keep interacting with the member secretary for that. So this kind of questions and clarifications could be resolved if the researcher is well versed with the guidelines that are there in our country, like the ICMR Ethical Guidelines 2017, where it clearly gives that research that needs to go for review and the types of review based on the risk that the project carries through. So that is before putting it to the committee. Then after coming to the committee, the functionality of the committee. So it can vary from being a daunting and challenging experience to a very investigator-friendly ethics committee. So there are investigator-friendly ethics committee. By mean, they just come and present it and okay, your proposal is approved. So there are ethics committees like that. And there is the overbearing ethics committee, which is called which asks too many questions, and the researcher is not comfortable with asking questions. The main thing that the researcher's concern is, why do the people ask about science? They have to look into ethics. I presented my protocol in a scientific advisory committee. This has been vetted by scientific committee. This has been vetted by peer reviewers and the sponsors. But still, they ask me to make changes in the title, in the objective. Now the title can't be changed. I have to go and explain to the sponsor. So these are the different concerns that the researcher has when they are undergoing review. Their project undergoes review in the ethics committee. The other issues are like the functionality of the ethics committee in terms of frequency of meetings. So not every institution, except for the teaching institution in medical colleges, they have their ethics committee scheduled once a month or even twice a month because of the volume of proposals. But in some research institutions, it's only a quarterly or alternate months meeting. So in between, the researcher, based on the call for a proposal, is not able to submit the research to the sponsor because the ethics committee approval is pending. So the frequency of meeting is a real challenge for the researcher. And some ethics committees, they give a lot of problem in providing the approval letters. There is a lot of delay between the meeting and the receipt of the approval letter by the investigator. And some ethics committees, especially for regulatory trials, have to give an approval letter in a specified format for regulatory trials, which they do not conform to when the investigator requests for. So there have been instances that ethics committee do not give it in that format, which makes the problem more difficult for the researchers. And the other most important thing is when the researcher is involved in multi-centric studies, where they will be the lead institution coordinating the study, where they have to go to multiple ethics committees, have to be, the protocol has to be presented, and they give a lot, all the ethics committee give their own views on the protocol, especially the science of it. And that is a real challenge. So though we have this common ethics review, it's still fully not functional in our country. So all the ethics committees have to be approached for a single proposal. If there are 10 sites, then ethics committees have to be on board. The other thing is multiple forms. The common forms are there. I know Dr. Rowley had mentioned about the common forms that need to be used for ethics committee. Each ethics committee has got a different SOP and different type of forms that needs to be filled. So if we are going to approach more than one ethics committee, you need to put your protocol in a different format that each ethics committee wants it based on its SOP for its submission for its review. So that, in that way, there's a lot of delay and a lot of repetition work unnecessarily. The other aspect is some ethics committee, mostly the independent ethics committee and some private ethics committee, they have an exorbitant fees for reviewing proposals. So we are not sure whether there is a cap on that, but still that is a huge concern for the researcher to pay that exorbitant fees to get their project cleared of that ethics committee. And during the EC review, I don't know, there is some kind of an antagonism between the researcher and the ethics committee member. Some kind of an animosity sets in once the questions start coming up. And like our previous panelist also mentioned that the member does not like me, so she's going to question about my study. If that person is there, then finished, my study will not get approved. So these are some of the concerns that the researchers have. The other issues that the researchers have are the review of serious adverse events now. So as part of regulatory clinical trials and also academic trials, the ethics committee plays a very crucial role in reviewing the serious adverse events and giving their reports within the stipulated time period, which some of the upcoming ethics committees have to be educated upon to keep up the timelines. So some of the investigators find it difficult, those who are doing regulatory studies, because the ethics committees do not comply with kind of stipulated things. So these are the numerous challenges that the researcher has while going through this ethics committee approval.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bhanureka. In your experience, you just tell me that how many researchers actually look into the ethical issues themselves before submitting the proposal, so that the committee is not going to ask them too many questions if they themselves have realized what are the possible ethical issues, so that they are prepared for, what are the action to be taken on that. But do you think that all the researchers are doing that?
Ma'am, I think we need, that's the part of the institution where the institution has to build capacity of the researchers, and ethics committee do have a very format or form that needs submission that questions about all the main ethical considerations that is required for a particular project, like the informed consent process, the risks, the benefits, privacy, confidentiality, and then so many issues like specific issues which involves vulnerable population and storage of samples, etc. So as a researcher, it is the responsibility of the researcher to keep updated of the guidelines, so that I do agree with you, ma'am, a good research proposal which the researcher themselves looks into all the 4 cardinal principles of ethics, which is autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, at the designing of the proposal would really go a long way in getting easy approvals at the ethics committee. And I think at each thing should be addressed in as when they submit their proposal, or even develop their proposal, in fact.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Banu. That's the most important component. That's why we have asked you to be part of this panel, because it's a joint work between an ethics committee. Members don't exist alone. It's a joint response between the researcher and the ethics committee members. So if the researchers realize this, their responsibility to submit everything properly, I don't think the ethics committee becomes an enemy ethics committee. It becomes a friendly ethics committee to support all research. Thank you so much. I think we have crossed our time, but very short time. But I have just few questions to Dr. Roli. Dr. Roli.
Ma'am, may I request you to pose the questions to Mr. Pradhan, the Deputy Drugs Controller, who is here with us.
Okay, I didn't realize that Pradhan has joined. Welcome, Dr. Pradhan. You are one of the most important part of this group. There are many questions which people are raising, and I'll be very happy if you can.
Thank you, ma'am. I am audible, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you, ma'am.
You are audible, but you are not visible. That's why, sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, now you are visible. Yeah, welcome. It's see, when we are talking about the ethics committees and the regulations, of course, one of the important questions which is there, which is raised by many people, which I'm sure you'll be able to give some clarification. When people go for registration of the ethics committees, with the CDSCO, now we have 2 registration mechanism in this country: CDSCO registration and DHR registration. When you go for CDSCO registration, I understand, of course, whatever was the originally set up, the composition of the members by the CDSCO is asked for. And when you look at the ICMR guidelines, we had a little bit more broad aspects of having, to facilitate the functioning of ethics committees. We have chair and vice chair. We also say that you can have alternate members, like in the beginning, both the Dr. Mathurs talked about it. You have alternate members for facilitating easy functioning. Even the member secretary can have an alternate member secretary. But when people go for CDSCO registration, I understand objections are raised that these are not as per CDSCO requirements, so we can't register. So people are asked to change the committee, so they remove the vice chair, they remove the alternate members and things. My question to you is that, yes, the ICMR guideline has become part of the drugs rule, NDCT rules in 2019. So whatever is given in the ICMR guideline will also be followed by the committees, and institutions do both regulatory trials as well as general biomedical research. So they have to comply with both. Now, I just would like to ask you that why these objections are raised, and can you facilitate and see that harmonized so that the institutions don't face these difficulties? Because even the NABH accreditation is as per the CDSCO requirement, and I understand they are also putting objections. So these are the questions many people have asked, that how do we do registration at both the things without any problem?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. First of all, actually, I would like to congratulate ICMR Bioethics Unit, NCDIR Bengaluru, for organizing this program. This is a very important aspect, because I was listening from the about various experience that was being shared by other speakers also. So, ma'am, with respect to specific questions that ICMR guidelines, there that member, vice chairman, and or alternative member secretary may be there, because we have to come across to some kind of harmonization in terms of regulatory requirements. That issues can be actually discussed, and further action can be taken. But right now, because as you are aware, and all other experts who are renowned experts,
we have lost you. You lost your voice, Dr. Pradhan. We can't hear you.
Mr. Pradhan, I'll request you to stop your video. Maybe that will help to increase the bandwidth. If you can hear us.
Can you hear us, Mr. Pradhan?
I think we have lost the connection. I think in the interest of time.
I know. Once he joins, we'll continue with him. Dr. Roli, I just have few questions to you because before we move on to Dr. Torres, one is many people are asking question about the payment to be made for the, there are two things. One is, can ethics committees charge money for reviewing proposal? The second question is that, can all the members get honorarium for their being members of the committee? Yeah, yes, Dr. Pradhan, can you?
I'm now audible. Hello.
Yeah, now you are audible, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Sorry, there is some connectivity problem. So actually, because as everybody is aware, there are a lot of concerns that are highlighted from time to time, and also we are listening today because all those members and member secretary, chairman, chairperson, clinician who are members of ethics committee, they are also raising various issues of challenges, how to address all these things. Therefore, I think today's program is very important, and we have to actually educate everybody, and we have to train them. We have to ensure that all the members are well versed with the regulatory requirements, or be it ICMR guidelines or GCP guidelines. Everything has to be ensured. Otherwise, because I was listening that one of the renowned expert, ma'am Nandini ma'am, was sharing her experience about how actually that chairmanship was changed and all these things. And also similar concerns have been raised by other members also, that if you are personally known to somebody, some experts, if any member raised very too much questions, then that may be taken in a different manner, or all these things. So as we all know, because ethics committee is for that, because it is a multidisciplinary committee, there are members are of experts in various fields, and therefore that type of discussion, deliberation is a healthy discussion. But to come to a consensus decision, I think the important is that everybody, every members and chairman, member secretary or clinician, whoever is playing his role, they should be well versed with the subject, with the regulatory requirement, with the guidelines. Otherwise, if somebody, one member, if he or she raises one point which may not be relevant, because here our aim is to ensure right, safety, and well-being of the subject. Also, we have to respect the human persons or research participants, and we have to ensure that to do no harm. But at the same time, there will be some kind of risk, inherent risk in any kind of research, biomedical research or clinical trials. So we have to make a balance in this, that legal requirement, ethical aspects, and also the benefit of the clinical research that the society is going to have. So all these things have to be kept in mind, and while deliberating a specific proposals and all these things. Therefore, all members should be well versed with all kinds of requirements and guidelines. Then only I think it is possible to come to a conclusion and to come to a consensus decision. That is very important. I think this type of programs and all these things which are being conducted, these helps in creating the knowledge and skill of all members. I think that's why I would like to congratulate ICMR Bioethics Units for doing this. And specific questions that you have raised, yes, ICMR guidelines that provides that they may have vice chairman, they may have alternate, member secretary. But at the same times, in our case, that provision is not there. So we have to discuss this, that how to harmonize both the requirements, so that those challenges which are now being faced, because at the same times, chairman has a very immense role for reviewing any proposals and all these things. However, if there is a vice chairman or say alternate chairman, then how it will be ensured that that is not misused? Even if members are alternate members, how they will function, whether both will be there in a particular meeting, or any one member will have his opinion. All these things have to be deliberated, and also the regulatory requirements and guidelines have to be harmonized. I think then we can come to it. Right now,
Yeah.
because there is no clear-cut provision under our new drugs clinical trial rules for regulatory clinical trials.
Yeah. So I think you agree that we should harmonize both
That
these at the
there may
earliest,
be
because people are
alternative
facing
members,
difficulties
secretary or
on a regular
vice
basis.
chairman, or
And the
sometimes
second is
then
that,
any member
yes,
can be. Yes.
Yeah, that is one. And second is that the quorum requirement should be, when a regulatory trial is reviewed, the quorum requirement should be as per the CDSCO requirements. That is a must. Nobody can question that. But having additional members in the committee for the routine functioning of the committee should not be any problem. But I think we'll have to discuss it, but we have to come to reach a consensus at the earliest, because people have been having this problem during registration. They are writing to us. So I think Dr. Rowley and you have to sit together, and then we'll have to harmonize so that the institutions don't have these difficulties. So we'll have to speak the same language. But we have to be very clear that where is the distinction and what it is.
Because yes. Because these regulation rules, these are dynamic. These are subject to changes and all these things.
Dynamic.
With times and
so
all these
we'll have to keep changing, but we have to see that there are harmonization, because the institutions are same. They do both the kind of studies. They should not face any difficulties. And they cannot have different committees for different purposes. Same committee only will review. So it should be there. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Pradhan. Yes, Roli.
Thank you.
I would just like to tell here everybody that we have, as it is, we had 300, 400 questions earlier. Now itself, I'm seeing in the chat box, there are 254 questions. It's really impossible to answer for all the questions, but I'm sure what Dr. Rowley is going to do in future is she has to going to prepare a FAQs, and then I think we will prepare all of us will look into that, prepare the answers, we'll post it in the NCDIR website, so that you see that all the questions which people are asking, it will be answered. But I don't think, as you can understand, it can't be answered today. Looking at the number of questions which I am seeing on this chat box, question and answer, but we'll see that these answers are provided, and Dr. Rowley is already preparing. She already prepared an FAQ, a huge one. But I think to that we are going to add many more questions, which is now being asked, and then that answer will be given. But for the time being, Rowley, you can just answer one or two questions. One is about the payment charged by the ethics committees. People have a concern. The other concern is that the honorarium to the members, because some institutions pay, some institutions don't pay any honorarium. So what is it?
Ma'am, this is an issue which is an institutional matter from what we see from ICMR, that as per the institutional rules, one can fix up the amount of honorarium that can be given to the services of the members of the ethics committee. So from ICMR, we have not recommended any amount as such. And similarly, the amount of payment that they would like to charge for a proposal review is again another institutional policy decision. The problem is that there are no direct funds that are coming to support the work of the ethics committee. It's not like a permanent department in the institute. And that is why we have to think about these alternative mechanisms to gather funding for running the functioning of the ethics committee. Ethics committee, as we see, has a lot of work, but there is no recognition at all from any quarter that this is a permanent activity of any research institution, and a certain amount of funding should be devoted to it. So it is in this process that various institutions have adopted different mechanisms. Some are charging a small fee for review, some are not, some are managing from the internal funds. So this is all at present, it is flexible. So from ICMR, we don't have a guideline on that. Ma'am, I think we have to move on to our international speaker.
We are not going to take any more questions, and we'll finish the question answer session and the panel discussion. I really thank all the panelists. It's extremely, I'm grateful to all the panelists for giving their time and being there throughout and attending the entire session. I think the valuable, your valuable comments and what your remarks will be, I'm sure is going to be helpful for everybody. I'm seeing the more than 600 participants are there, and even now there are almost 565 participants are still there. That shows the interest and people want to know the answers. See, these are the questions were raised by the registered participants, and people are waiting for these answers, and all of you have done a wonderful job, and thank you all for giving your valuable time to us for this session. I think the way, the kind of response that we are going to have, I think, many more of such sessions, and we can plan it in a different ways also. So I now hand over to Dr. Rowley, and then she can hand over to Shilpi for the next session.
I think I'll request Shilpi to introduce our speaker, and also meanwhile I'll request all the panelists to switch on the camera for a short few seconds so we can just take a quick picture.
Yeah, please, everybody, please switch on.
Shilpi can then introduce.
Mr. Pradhan, please switch on your video.
So moving ahead, the last session.
Urmila, Dr. Kaul. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
please, your video on.
I would request almost all the experts to kindly switch on their camera.
Dr. Kaul, are you there? Okay. Anyway. Yes, Dr. Kaul.
Thank you, all of you. I think Shilpi, we can move on. Thank you, all of you.
Thanks, all of you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next session.
Next session. Thank you.
Shilpi, I think you're muted.
Yes,
ma'am, we are not doing the poll. We had some poll questions. Let's go ahead because of in the interest of time. We'll do it in the end.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Moving ahead, the last session for today is on importance of multidisciplinary ethics committee, role of non-medical members, and to provide eloquent insights, I would like to invite an international guest speaker, Dr. Christina E. Torres. She's coordinator, Forum for Ethics Review Committee in Asia and Western Pacific, FERCAP, adjunct social science professor, Thammasat University, and visiting professor, NIH University of the Philippines. Welcome, and over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, would you be sharing your slides, ma'am, or ma'am?
I will share my slides.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to be part of your workshop. I have gained many insights listening to the different stakeholders as far as research is concerned, the different members of the ethics committee, the researcher perspective, the regulatory perspective, as well as the perspective of the head of the institution. So this is a very rare opportunity where everyone has a chance to be able to define their specific roles and their challenges. This afternoon, I'm very happy to see my friends online, Dr. Basanta, who's one of the founding members of FERCAP, Dr. Nandini, with whom I'm doing online surveys during these days of COVID, Dr. Matur, who has been with me learning the ropes of ethics review, Dr. Urmila. I think her institution has contributed a lot towards research about ethics committee, and of course, the different ethics committees that we have visited, including Tata Memorial Hospital. So while listening to the different presentation, I was writing down notes, and there are many things that I have learned from you. First and foremost, what should be the perspectives of members of ethics committee? I think the most basic perspective that we have to adopt is one of humility, that we are part of a multidisciplinary team, and therefore we are not the person who knows all and who can speak about everything that happens in a research ethics committee. Being humble would mean that we are open to learning. We are open to learning the perspectives of the different fields of research, and we are open to learning the perspectives of the lay person. Your lay person is a very important person, and I think she was able to articulate this afternoon what are the things that they are looking for. And first and foremost is respect. And I think respect is a very important characteristic that we have to follow in an ethics committee, particularly if this is a multidisciplinary ethics committee. We have to show respect for experts in different areas. We have to show respect to our lay member, who is the representative of the patient groups and the participants. We have to show respect to the researchers who are submitting protocols to us, because without research, then there is no reason for an ethics committee to exist. No? So the clientele really of ethics committees will be the researchers who are submitting protocols to the ethics committee. And I hope that at the end, it's going to result in empowerment, no? And empowerment of the different stakeholders in research. So I'm supposed to speak about the importance of the non-medical and probably the non-scientific member. And the reason behind this is that the target population of our researchers are the participants. And ethics committees have been created in order to protect the human participants in research. And therefore, it's very important that we accord to them the level of respect, the level of empathy, so that we are really able to protect them. One of the criticisms of ethics committee is that we never ask the participants what is their feedback about our work. We're supposed to protect them, but we never ask them whether we are really able to protect them. So with this quote, no, it says, it is easy to see ethical in the research context as being good, doing no physical harm, but this directs attention away from the participants, the group, and the community who would comprise the target population for our research. So I think that is the heart of the matter, that non-medical and non-scientific members are important because their perspectives will tell us what are the expectations of participants when they are recruited in our protocol. So first and foremost, we need to understand the role of the Research Ethics Committee. As I said, without research proposal, there's no reason for a Research Ethics Committee. So the job is to review research proposal involving human participants, check whether they agree with local and international guidelines, and many times we are more fascinated about local and international guidelines rather than putting a face on the participants in our research. We're supposed to monitor studies when they begin, and ethics committee is very powerful because they have the authority to approve, reject, modify, or stop studies that do not conform to accepted standards. And oftentimes, the standards play a higher role than the perception of the human participants themselves. So, according to GCP,
defines the composition, the functions, and operations of the ethics committee. It says that there has to be a reasonable number of members with necessary qualifications and experience, at least 5, 1 non-scientific, 1 non-affiliated, independent of the investigator and sponsor, and there has to be a roster of independent consultants. The minimum number of IRB members in GCP is 5, but quorum is also 5. So that is a requirement of ICHGCP related to quorum of IRBs. They review and evaluate the science, the medical aspects, the ethics, and the consent form. And they should maintain a list of members and their qualifications. And therefore, it is important that the IRB should require the curriculum vitae of all its. So, the IRB has a multi-sectoral membership. They're made up of experts. They are medical experts, they are scientific experts, but to present the perspective of the lay persons and the participants, you also have non-scientists and non-medical members. Together, they have the duty to look at the risk. And risk would have many perspectives. It can be seen from the legal perspective, as described by our lawyer today. There are many cultural considerations which can be enunciated by the layperson and the social scientist. And there are community perspectives, particularly in India, where you have a very diverse population. But at the same time, the procedures and scientific validity must be evaluated by experts in different fields. I think many problems come about because we take over the functions of the experts. So I think this is something that would have to be addressed. There are other issues that would have to be considered, like gender balance, social representation, which should be reflected in the composition, and membership should be designed to minimize the conflict of interest, particularly in the decision-making process. In doing ethics review, a multi-sectoral perspective is very important for us to interpret the laws and regulations of the land, the ethical standards, which are both local and international, and of course, the procedures that we are going to follow should comply with good clinical practice or good research practice, and all these elements we apply to a study protocol. But again, we adopt different interpretations in the way we analyze the protocol and in the way we analyze the laws and the standards. So, what is good protocol review? So I'm going to talk now about the system that should be in place within an ethics committee. In FERCAP, we emphasize appropriate and competent primary reviewers because this is about the technical aspect, this is about scientific validity, and therefore we say the technical protocol reviewer should be a subject expert related to the protocol. So that ensures us that there is going to be good scientific review because a primary reviewer should have some experience in research, should have some experience in clinical practice, if this is a clinical trial, and if this is a social science protocol, then the primary reviewer should be a social scientist. If this is a law protocol, the primary reviewer should be a legal expert. So experts have a role to play in the review of scientific issues in an ethics committee. But at the same time, we identify an informed consent reviewer. And that is the role of the non-medical and the scientific members because they represent the perspectives of the participants and the perspective of the patients who are being enrolled in research. And the responsibility is to diligently read the protocol details, conduct literature search themselves so that they are updated about the state of the art. Oftentimes, members of ethics committees are not updated on what are the current research methodologies that are being used in different kinds of clinical trials or in different kinds of social science research. So it becomes the responsibility
responsibility of the expert reviewer to do literature search themselves. So we always tell them, you should know how to Google so that you are able to be updated about the latest information of the protocol that you are reviewing. And then, very important for us is a comprehensive assessment form. Because without a comprehensive assessment form, then the review is not complete. You will forget many things in your review if you are doing it from the top of your head. So one of our requirements for FERCAP recognition is a comprehensive assessment form that would look at the scientific issues which the experts should review, and then the ethical issues, and then the informed consent issues, the location of the research, where it's going to be done, as well as advertisements that would recruit participants to this study. I think we should not forget the review of these important things to ensure that there is a comprehensive review of the protocol. Now, what is the role of the non-medical members in the review of biomedical research? I am a social scientist, and I am a non-medical member when I sit in the ethics committee. And during a board meeting, these are the things that I do. I ask for clarification about the procedures in order for me to understand the protocol. In the FERCAP SOPs, we require the researcher to submit a summary of the protocol. And I think I heard that being mentioned. The summary of the protocol should be written in lay language, and the primary reviewer will project that on the screen so that everyone is going to see it. And me as a lay member, I will ask for clarification about the medical procedures that are going to be done. The next thing I'm going to ask about would be standards of care. So I always ask, how would the new interventions be different from the standards of care? Is there any patient who will be deprived of standard of care because you are using placebo? And of course, the medical people will answer my questions based on their understanding of the protocol. Then I would ask for details of the interventions that are being in the study. What are the responsibilities of the patient if they are enrolled in this study? So essentially, my role is to represent the patient perspective and their concerns. And I voice out such relevant concerns. I put myself in the shoes of the participant in order to find out what should a participant or a patient ask when they are enrolled in such studies. And very important later on, after understanding the protocol, is for me as a non-medical member to comment about the consent form, whether I understood it, whether it contains the same information as found in the protocol, and therefore this contributes to a good review. So that is the role of the non-medical person in biomedical research. So very important, I think, is good teamwork. What is good teamwork? Good teamwork between the researcher and the ethics committee. We also put ourselves in the shoes of the ethics committee. What is it that they want to do? And we adapt the perspective of the researcher rather than thinking about what we will do if we are going to do this protocol. So we realize their limitations, we realize their financial capabilities, and therefore, if we are able to see that from the perspective of the researchers, I think we would have more empathy towards the researcher. But the job of the ethics committee is to identify and weigh the risks and benefits of the study. And therefore now I shift my attention from empathizing with the researcher, and now I am empathizing with the participant. So we members of the ethics committee should be able to shift roles in order to be able to show empathy to the stakeholders in research. So we identify and weigh the risks and benefits of the study to the participants. But at the same time now, we try to check on the financial and personal conflict of interest of the researcher so that it is part of the application form that the researcher should declare their conflicts of interest, and it has to be evaluated by the Research Ethics Committee. At the same time, we look at the recruitment procedures that they are going to use. Are they exercising undue influence in order to recruit? What are the incentives that they will give the participants? So we are looking at things from the perspective of the participant. So good protocol review is about participatory scientific and ethics review. But when I say participatory, I think we have to recognize the role of scientific subject experts. Who are the scientific subject experts? Many social scientists complain that when they submit their protocols to an ethics committee that is dominated by medical doctors, the medical doctors medicalize their protocols because they are not familiar with social science methods. So I think it's very important that appoint a primary reviewer with related scientific expertise. And this scientific reviewer would look at the protocol. Are the objectives SMART? What's SMART? That's an acronym, which means objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, so that at the end of the study, we are able to see whether the SMART objectives were achieved. Design and methodology is very important for the subject expert to comment about. Are they using observational or interventional methods? We know that in ethics, observational methods would have lower risk than interventional methods. So our comment should be appropriate to the type of methods that are being used. In social science research, are they using quantitative methods or qualitative methods? The reviewer needs to understand the difference. If we are interested in general patterns, then we use quantitative methods and we use statistical tools. But when we are interested in insights about specific vulnerable populations, then we have to use the qualitative methods and we have to use open-ended questions so that we are able to determine the perceptions, the meanings that our participants will give to a specific issue. Inclusion and exclusion criteria include those who will be able to answer the research question, exclude those who are at added risk. Scientific tools will be the questionnaire, the different clinical procedures. Then it's very important to define the data analysis plan, how they will arrive at conclusions. And again, in FERCAP, we emphasize the importance of defining the outcomes of the study, because we are not just interested in the book-bound copies of the protocols, but we are interested in how the outcomes will contribute to better social value. And there is an ethical consideration section as well in the protocol. So this is about science, and in science, we ask the subject experts to be the one to do the review. And me, I'm a social scientist, but I have learned very much about biomedical research by listening to the analysis of subject experts. These are medical people with related clinical experience, so they are familiar with the drugs. They know what drugs will cause adverse events. They know the difference between an investigational new drug and the standard of care. So in terms of scientific review, we recognize the importance of subject experts. So the next thing that an ethics committee has to look at is ethics. And in ethics, here, the scientific members and the non-scientific and non-medical members are now in equal footing. So it will enable all researchers to comment on risk, because risk is based on different perspectives. A medical person will do surgeries every day, but for a patient or for a non-medical person, you do not experience surgery every day. And therefore, there is a wide difference about the appreciation of risk between a medical person and a non-medical person. So now we have open discussion about the ethical issues. What are the benefits to participants and society? So direct benefits to participants, indirect benefits in terms of better knowledge, better clinical procedures. So research is a very noble activity. Then the next issue is about vulnerability. What kind of participants are we enrolling in this study? Are they cognitively impaired? Are they suffering from severe illness? So vulnerability assessment is very important for an ethics committee to make comments about. But it's not enough to comment on vulnerability. We should be able to suggest measures to protect vulnerable participants in terms of requiring assent, in terms of requiring better monitoring of the study. You know, most ethics committees, they act like a jury. They will say guilty of bad protocol. But our job is really to make a positive contribution to research by making good suggestions on how vulnerable participants can be protected. How is privacy and confidentiality protected? How are conflicts of interest addressed? So there's need for a comprehensive assessment form to make sure that all these things are commented about. So that is about reviewing the ethical issues in a specific protocol. Now, the third one is about the informed consent form. And here again, the lead person, the lead reviewer is the non-medical or non-scientific person, or even the lay person, because this is about patient perspective. So we are now on equal footing, and I would say the lay person should be listened to because they are the ones that know the perspectives of patients who are enrolled in a clinical trial and participants who are enrolled in a social science study. So what are the essential informed consent elements? There has to be full disclosure of information, the same information found in the protocol. There has to be disclosure of how much you're going to get, what is the medical care that I'm going to get, what are my responsibilities as a patient, as a participant. So it is the lay person who will be able to comment on this. And if the lay person does not understand the informed consent form, then it should not be approved by the ethics committee. So comprehension is very important. Simple terms and local language may have to be used, and there has to be a statement that participation is voluntary and you can withdraw anytime. So these are the different roles of the members of the ethics committee. And if we recognize each other's contribution to good ethics review, then I think we will do a better job. So good ethics review is about a multidisciplinary team conscious of their duty of doing good and avoiding harm to research participants, to the community and their environment. Very important is respect for one another's opinion. And I think it's the role of the chair to be able to solicit comments from all members of a multidisciplinary team so that we are able to protect human participants in research. So thank you for your attention, and I hope we will have more sessions like this because they are very informative and there are very good insights that are developed by various stakeholders of research.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for an excellent presentation. That marks the end of the session. And I would also like to thank all the speakers for an overwhelming and informative session. And in the interest of time, I would like to ask Dr. Oli, ma'am, if we could run the poll right now, ma'am.
Yeah, I think let us run the poll because we've prepared some questions.
Yes, yes,
ma'am.
Take
some time. 20 seconds per question.
Yes. So the first question coming up on the screen, the role of a chairperson includes all the following, except prepare the agenda and minutes of the meeting, seek conflict of interest declaration from members and mitigate the COI issues, ensure quorum and fair decision making, handle complaint against researchers, EC members, and request for the use of EC data. So the results are on your screen, you may see, and most of you've got it right. The answer is prepare the agenda and minutes of the meeting. Can we have the next poll question on screen? The ethicist member in an ethics committee should particularly review the following, except the social milieu of the participant, the background of partners of clinical trial agreement, benefit risk assessment, informed consent document. You may see the answer on the, most of you have voted for the correct answer. The answer is the background of partners of clinical trial agreement. Can we have the next question, please? Choose a statement that does not belong to the group. Non-scientific members of the Research Ethics Committee have the following responsibilities. Explain clinical procedures in the protocol, ask about standards of care and practice, ask about details of intervention to be used in the study, represent patient perspectives and concerns. You can see the results of the poll, and the correct answer is explain clinical procedures in the protocol. Most of you've got it right. The next question. Who should talk to the patient when taking consent for a clinical trial? The treating doctor, researcher, nurse, or a family member? So we can see the results on the screen, and most of you have voted for the researcher, and the correct answer is the treating doctor. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your active participation. And I would like to hand it over to Dr. Oli Mathur for a few last words, if any.
Thank you, Shilpi. Thank you for hosting this program so well. And I thank all our panelists and speakers, our chairperson, Dr. Muthuswamy, our international guest, Dr. Christina E. Torres, and all the panelists, right from Dr. Urmila Thatte, Dr. Naresh Gupta, Dr. Dennis Xavier, Dr. B.T. Kaul, Dr. Shalini Bharat, Dr. Nandini Kumar, Ms. Harmala Gupta, Mr. A.K. Pradhan, Deputy Drugs Controller, who joined us, and Dr. Siddharth Laskar, Dr. Prashant Mathur, Dr. Banu Rekha, for joining today, along with so many of the ethics committee members from across the country. It is an amazing experience. I think first time we've had a meeting of this size where more than 500 members of ethics committees are participating today. We really hope this session was useful to you. We decided to break the monotony of not having classical slide presentations, but doing more with discussions. And we actually welcome your feedback, which the link will be shared with you. We request you to send your feedback as to how we should hold our sessions, because the online is the new normal. I also thank a number of our international participants who have joined from, I think, 7 countries with us today. So thank you all also for joining in. And of course, I have to thank Director and all staff of ICMR Bioethics Unit, as well as our IT team who have worked day and night, because our Zoom contract was only for 500 persons and we had to, in the 2-3 days time, we increased it to 1,000 capacity in order to accommodate more number of registrations that were pouring in. So I may not be thanking right now everybody, because a lot of people have worked hard. I would thank you all very much. And finally, once again, Dr. Muthuswamy, thank you for excellently chairing this session. And thank you all the participants, and thank you for your questions. I tried to reply to many, but you can write to us emails. We will try to get back to you with more detailed replies. And thank you all once again.